Dear friend across the river, my hands are cold and bare. Dear friend across the river, I'll take what you can spare. I ask of you a penny, my fortune it will be. I ask you without envy. We raise no mighty towers, our homes are built of stone. So come across the river and find the world below. Immediately, we are dropped into the world of Arcane. This is a world of suffering and a world of inequality. The group of people from one side of the river are poor, lacking in basic needs such as clothing and warmth, and we can assume at this point that the people on the other side are rich, prosperous, and ignorant. This almost lullaby-esque song may well have been taught to the young girl singing it so as to enable her to acquire any amount of money so that she can feed herself. And the fact that this song is being sung as she walks through what was very recently a battlefield is devastatingly ironic. We see a man thrown to the ground by an explosion before being executed by a soldier. We see two girls walking past the fire and corpses, the younger one covering her eyes whilst singing the song. The older girl stops walking, causing the younger one to stop singing and uncover her eyes. Both are shocked by what they see, but the older girl grips her sister's hand tight. They see a man beat one of the soldiers to death before he tells the girls that their parents have been killed. This is all told primarily with music, with very minimal use of sound effects and zero dialogue. The man then drops his weapons, indicating that he was not prepared for the consequences of engaging in whatever this fight was. Two young girls have just lost their parents, and continuing to fight will only make things worse. And so the man carries the girls back across the bridge, away from the soldiers. That was the opening 3 minutes of Arcane, and it managed to be incredibly emotionally effective by being focused entirely on the characters' emotional reactions. We have no idea who these three characters are, and we have no idea why they are here. What this scene delivers from a plot standpoint is that there was a fight on a bridge. What this scene delivers from a character standpoint, however, is the backbone of the entire season. The show has not pile-drived the audience with exposition so as to set up the various plot threads that the season is going to explore. It has instead given us a fantastic introduction to three of its main characters in a very grounded way. This is clearly not the beginning of the story. Who these people are and what they are doing is essentially a mystery box at this point, the purpose of which is to hook the viewer and draw them in. And what sets Arcane apart from many modern stories is that it is heavily focused on character conflict, it uses the characters to thoroughly develop the setting, and it entirely avoids cheap nostalgia baiting, melodrama, or contrived tension building. Greetings randos and any newcomers. In this video series I'm going to be exploring what makes Arcane so good. And in order to do so, I will be structuring this series slightly differently to my previous analysis videos to avoid repeating myself and to allow me to make my points as clearly as possible. What this means for you is that unlike my videos on Rings of Power and The Hobbit, I strongly suggest that you watch the first 3 episodes of Arcane before watching this video. In total, Arcane is 9 episodes long, and it is split evenly into 3 acts of 3 episodes each. This video is going to be covering Act 1, which consists of Episode 1, Welcome to the Playground, Episode 2, Some Mysteries Are Better Left Unsolved, and Episode 3, The Base Violence Necessary for Change. I will not be going through each episode point by point in a chronological manner. However, I will, for the most part, avoid referencing things that happen in Acts 2 and 3 until the future videos in this series. If you have seen my Rings of Power or The Hobbit videos, you will already know that when I find something worthy of praise, I will praise it, even if the overall product is not very good. Likewise, if I encounter anything in Arcane that I believe to be a problem, I will highlight it unless it is incredibly minor and was simply an inconsequential mistake. I have already seen Arcane multiple times, and I'm creating this series armed with the firm belief that the show is excellent. However, as my intention here is not to circle jerk the show until my willy falls off, I am not going to refrain from pointing out things that either don't make sense or could perhaps have been improved upon. Because as excellent as Arcane is, it is by no means perfect. With that out of the way, I will quickly provide an overview of the plot of Act 1 of Arcane to provide some basic context for when I dive into the characters. This is your last chance, full spoilers for Act 1 of Arcane from here on out. So, Vi, Powder, Clagger, and Mylo travel from the Undercity to Piltover for a little smash and grab to steal valuable items from a specific workshop Vi has decided to target. They successfully acquire multiple valuable pieces of technology, and Powder discovers a chest containing 6 blue crystals, which she takes. As the owner of the workshop returns, they panic, barricade the door, and during their escape, Powder whipsies one of the crystals, which causes a violent explosion. They are pursued by the Piltover enforcers, but manage to make their way back across the bridge and into the Undercity. Vander and Clagger then head to Benzo's pawn shop so that Vander can speak to Benzo, as he is worried about the potential repercussions of what has just happened. Grayson, an enforcer, arrives and wants Vander to hand over the person responsible for the explosion, which Vander refuses to do. Marcus, another enforcer, learns from Silco that the people responsible are Vander's children, and he attempts to arrest them at the last drop, but they evade him. With conflict between the Undercity and Piltover seemingly inevitable, Vi attempts to turn herself over to Grayson, but Vander intervenes and takes her place. Silco then murders Grayson and abducts Vander shortly after the arrest. Vi, Clagger, and Mylo attempt to rescue Vander from Silco, although Powder is told to stay behind. They reach Vander successfully, but realize they have walked into a trap. Vi fights off Silco's men before being overwhelmed. Powder, having followed Vi in an attempt to help, combines a handful of the blue crystals with one of her bombs, which causes a massive explosion and kills both Mylo and Clagger. In the ensuing fight, Vander is fatally stabbed by Silco, but he is able to rescue Vi before he dies. Vi realizes Powder was responsible for the explosion, prompting her to abandon her sister. Silco has the opportunity to kill Powder, but decides instead to adopt her, whilst Vi is captured by Marcus and arrested. Meanwhile, Jayce is arrested and brought before the Council of Piltover as the research he was conducting with the goal of artificially creating magic was unsanctioned and illegal, and he is consequently expelled from the Academy of Science. He wants to continue his research, but both his mother and Councillor Cassandra, Caitlyn's mother and Jayce's patron, refuse to help him further. Viktor visits Jayce, who is now suicidal, and tells him he wants them to continue his research together. They recover his equipment and successfully create magic using one of the remaining hex crystals. Okay, now that I've refreshed your memory on what actually went down in Act 1, let's start exploring the characters that made all of this happen. First off, I'm going to talk about an early scene which exemplifies how effective Arcane is at conveying character information, before I start looking at specific characters in turn. The writers demonstrate very early on that they will not squander any opportunity to inform us of their characters. In their opening scene, Vi, Powder, Clagger, and Mylo need to jump from one building to another. And where a lesser show may well have simply had them jump over quickly before moving on to more exposition and plotting, Arcane informs us of all 4 of these characters by showing us how they each jump this gap. Vi knows exactly what she is doing. She is clearly very skilled at parkour, and she confidently leads the others towards their destination. Mylo likes to show off and believes himself to be more skilled than the others. Clagger is extremely direct, doesn't seem to care what anyone else thinks, is an opportunist, and also really likes food. We then come to Powder.
Called it. This is on you, Vi.
I'll get her.
Mylo expected this to happen, and he makes sure to tell Vi that this is her fault. Clagger offers to go and get Powder to solve the problem, but Vi encourages Powder to make the jump herself, which she does, however she nearly falls off afterwards and is caught by Vi. This tells us pretty clearly that Powder is far more capable than she is aware, but still needs a bit of help from her sister to be as competent as the other 3, possibly indicating that Vi is trying to make Powder grow up too quickly. This scene takes approximately 2 minutes, and it very clearly and effectively sets up all 4 of these characters, the relationships they have, why they are here, what they are doing, and what the potential consequences for their actions will be. All of this is accomplished by having the characters speak to each other in a natural, consistent, and believable manner, rather than by saying things they have no reason to say for the sole benefit of the audience. Now I will talk about Vi. The opening prologue scene functions so as to establish Vi as having a deep hatred of the Enforcers due to the fact that they killed her parents, and she is shown early on to have no problem with escalating violence against them. This shot implies that she also blames Piltover as a whole for putting her and Powder in this situation, which fantastically and efficiently sets up the core conflict of the series. Vi's feelings on Piltover are explored further in episode 2, when she explicitly states that she has lived her entire life knowing she is worth less than the Topsiders.
I grew up knowing I'm less than them, that my place is down there.
And we also see that she initially considers the idea of Vander having any kind of deal with the Enforcers to be a fundamental betrayal of their values, before Vander explains himself.
Vander's gotta deal with the Enforcers.
What deal? What I don't understand is how you can work with them. We were here, we saw what they did.
Vi was unable to comprehend the idea of working with the Enforcers, which, aside from providing the basis for some excellent character conflict within this scene, also serves as a nice piece of foreshadowing. We see that Vi is unable to protect Powder whenever she is emotionally overwhelmed. Firstly, when she realizes her parents have died and she does not make sure Powder is still covering her eyes. Again, when she is dealing with Deckard and only realizes afterwards that Powder is missing. And again, during the climax of episode 3, when she temporarily abandons her sister, resulting in her falling in with Silco. This reinforces that although Powder heavily depends on Vi, Vi is also just a kid. Vi has been forced into this position through unfortunate circumstances, and she often struggles to do what's best for both her and Powder. Vi is also shown repeatedly to be impulsive, such as when she kicks down the door Mylo was lockpicking.
You gonna get that door open anytime soon?
Working on it. Seeing as I'm the only one who knows how to pick locks.
You gotta make a door.
And the fact that her entire plan to rob this Piltover workshop goes against Vander's wishes.
I also told you time and time again the North Side's off limits. We stay out of Piltover's business.
And she is also occasionally naive, as she explicitly states that she doesn't care if her activities attract the attention of the Enforcers.
We make ourselves a problem for Piltover, and they will send the Enforcers.
So, why answer to them?
However, her being reckless and naive is acknowledged within the story as a character flaw. The writers do not approve of Vi's behavior, nor do they denounce it. Which actually brings me to a more general point. The writers of Arcane have enough faith in and respect for their audience that they are never preachy. They very rarely tell you what you should think of each character. The central characters in Arcane are generally very complex, and the show never pushes any kind of bias either for or against their actions and worldviews. The writers simply depict them as consistently and believably as possible, and the audience is then left to draw what they can out of what is presented. Anyway, Vi is shown to disagree with Vander on how to deal with the Enforcers, and she doesn't understand his reluctance to strike back at them.
When did you get so comfortable living in someone else's shadow?
This is established very early on and allows for some important character growth within the first couple of episodes. Vi's decision to turn herself in at the end of episode 2 relies entirely on the father-daughter relationship between her and Vander being absolutely believable. The writers allow Vi to learn from Vander, which shows us that Vi is not blinded by her worldview and that she is receptive to Vander's teachings. This aspect of her character in particular will be extremely important later in the series. She seems very experienced in criminal activity despite her age, although she notes to Vander later that she planned the workshop robbery entirely herself.
A real job.
We got our own tip, planned a route, nobody even saw. I took us there. If you want to be mad at me.
Which suggests that she is perhaps just now starting to become more involved and independent. Although crime seems to be the way of life in the Undercity, Vi seems to believe she is more justified in stealing from Piltover because of the inherent wealth disparity.
You think anyone topside's going hungry?
After Powder tells Vander that Little Man gave them the tip, Vi tries to take the entirety of the blame for things going wrong in order to protect Little Man. Although she doesn't believe that they actually did anything wrong, she wants to be the one who suffers the consequences of their actions, as the entire job was her idea. and she later attempts to turn herself over to the enforcers in order to avoid further conflict. This indicates that, despite the fact that Vi can be extremely reckless, she is nonetheless willing to take the fall herself and protect her friends, which is a direct consequence of Vander repeatedly trying to teach her to be responsible.
Those kids look up to you. When people look up to you, you don't get to be selfish. Whatever happens, it's on you. That path, it's not going to solve your problems. Nobody wins in war, Vi.
This, fantastically and ultimately tragically, means that Vi took Vander's lesson to heart but reacted in a way that Vander absolutely did not want. Vi also repeatedly goes out of her way to keep Powder from becoming depressed at her failure, and reminds her that Mylo, Clagger, and herself all have bad days, and she also encourages her that her bombs will work one day.
I've got these, and you've got those.
They never work.
They will.
They're gonna work this time. I know it.
Me too.
This firmly establishes a thematic connection between Powder's depression and her bombs. More on that later. At the end of episode 1, Vi conceals the fact that Powder has the crystals from Vander in order to keep him under the belief that all of the evidence of the burglary was lost.
These were in my pocket. They're from the apartment.
Let's keep this our little secret.
But she also chooses to let Powder keep the crystals. There are a few reasons why she may have done this. It is the only loot they managed to keep from the workshop heist, which was implied to be her first fully planned job, for which she was solely responsible, and Vi wouldn't want her carefully planned robbery that accidentally resulted in an explosion and attracted the attention of the enforcers to be for nothing. The crystals are also likely very valuable, and Vi wants to build a better life for herself and Powder, and she ultimately wants both of them to be respected. One other potential reason that I find quite interesting is that she is actually heeding Vander's words by letting Powder keep the crystals.
When people look up to you, you don't get to be selfish.
So it is entirely possible that she is putting Powder first by allowing her to do this. She realizes Powder needs this. Powder clearly really likes the crystals, despite not having a clue what they are. And the context of this conversation is that Vi is trying to motivate Powder by telling her how strong she can be. That, she said,
Let's keep this our little secret.
I think is her both using the crystals as a moment to bond with her sister, and also to extend to her a level of responsibility and treating her like an adult. In episode 2, we see Vi training, and during the series as a whole, we see her frequently get the shit beaten out of her, which makes the idea that she is this good at fighting far more believable. She trains hard, and she is not perfect. Vi is also shown to be somewhat unsure of herself, although she rarely allows others to see this. She wants Mylo, Clagger, and Powder to reassure her that she didn't fuck up, that she didn't take them on a job they couldn't handle. It is notable that this occurs after her discussion with Vander. Her confidence in herself has waned. Her father has impressed upon her that she must respect her position of responsibility, which is an excellent moment of motivated character growth for Vi. She also feels guilt, and although the explosion and the fight with Deckard were not directly her fault, her actions nonetheless caused all of this to happen, which ultimately informs her decision to turn herself in. Vi's predisposition towards feelings of guilt is also perfectly natural given the role she has been forced into by being the oldest of the 4 kids. She feels immense guilt when Vander is taken, as had she not tried to turn herself in, this would not have happened. Until Ekko told her what he saw, Vi was likely under the impression that her actions had directly gotten Vander killed. This was her fault, and from her perspective, she was punished immensely for trying to do the right thing. This also comes about after her conversation with Vander on the bridge, in which she looks to Vander for a solution.
What are we gonna do?
I don't know. I'll figure it out.
And when he does not provide her with one, she decides she needs to take action herself. After Vander is taken, Vi is unable to compose herself and properly explain what happened, very likely due to her extreme guilt, and she wants to quickly dip into the last drop, grab Vander's gauntlets, and leave without explaining anything to anyone. She tells Powder not to come as the stakes are too high, with Vander's life and potentially theirs on the line. Although Vi doesn't know who Silco is or what he is capable of, she does know that whatever killed Benzo was unlike anything she had ever seen.
It tore him apart.
She does not want to put Powder's life in danger, but more than that, Vi does not believe Powder will be of any use. It is one thing to encourage her and tell her that, yeah, you keep plugging away, kiddo, your bombs are gonna work someday, I just know it. You're stronger than you think you are, and everyone has bad days, etc., etc. But when the rubber hits the road, it is quite another thing to bring Powder on a life and death mission to rescue Vander. Vi does what she does out of both love and pragmatism, and she is absolutely justified in her actions, which is what makes this central conflict so compelling. Vi's plan is to simply get Vander and get out, as she puts it. This seems like a very dumb thing to do, and this is the kind of thing I often criticize in my coverage of bad media. However, Arcane is absolutely not bad media. The character of Vi would absolutely do this. She feels she has no choice. It was her fault Vander was taken. She was told by Vander to take care of the family, and she has already behaved recklessly multiple times. The writers have done ample groundwork to establish the fact that Vi would absolutely take this action. The question is not, is this the most optimal method of freeing Vander? The question is, would Vi do this? And the answer is unequivocally yes. After falling into Silco's trap, Vi faces down many of Silco's men despite being, of course, much smaller than them. She is able to defeat them through a combination of skill and perseverance. On the face of it, it seems slightly absurd that a teenage girl can defeat 8 adults, in particular after they start attacking her in pairs, but Arcane spent enough time setting up the character of Vi to make this as believable as possible. The writers could have simply banked on the game knowledge that, well, Vi has, she punches people, she's got, fists and she hits people so that she's going to hit things now. But they thankfully decided to make Vi a character rather than simply an idea imported from a video game. Vi is extremely skilled. She is fighting not only for her own life, but for the lives of her entire family, and she is wielding Vander's gauntlets. This is also by no means a clean fight. Vi takes multiple hits, and she is quite clearly struggling. She also knows Silco has some kind of monster in his ranks, although she doesn't know exactly what or where this thing is, meaning that she is not trying, nor is she expecting, to win. She is attempting to buy Mylo enough time to break out Vander, at which point they might have a fighting chance, and to buy Clagger enough time to find another way out. Vi's outburst towards Powder at the end of episode 3 is, in a word, heartbreaking. For now, I'm only going to talk about this from Vi's perspective. I will get to Powder soon. The reason this moment works so well is because both characters are totally justified in their beliefs and their reactions. Vi immediately asks why Powder did this as she stands over Vander's corpse, immediately placing the blame on her sister. Vi told Powder to stay at home, and she couldn't even do this right. Vi feared something like this would happen. Powder always makes mistakes, and Vi knew that on this mission, mistakes will cost lives. Vi slaps her sister hard across the face in frustration before telling her that Mylo was right about her. She jinxes every job. Vi's reaction is extreme, but it is entirely understandable and from her perspective entirely warranted. Her idiot sister just got the rest of her family killed. However, realizing what she has just done and likely recalling Vander's last words,
"Take care of Powder,"
Vi leaves. There are a few things to mention with regards to Vi walking away. She doesn't literally abandon Powder, however she does want to be alone in order to clear her head as best she can and grieve for her immense loss. And she, of course, can't do that whilst standing next to the person who caused that loss. As soon as she sees Silco standing over her sister, she attempts to rescue her, but is prevented from doing so by Marcus. And that is the end of Vi's story until we get to Act 2. Vi is an extremely clearly defined character who is relatable, understandable, compelling, flawed, and absolutely consistently believable within the world of Arcane. She is a fantastic protagonist. Moving on to Powder. Powder is too young to entirely comprehend what happened to her parents, and she remains very much unsure of herself. She is shown to be physically capable despite knowing she can't fight, and she doesn't want to disappoint Vi. However, we later see that she is much better than Mylo when it comes to shooting, meaning that she isn't entirely useless in a confrontation. And rather than arguing with Mylo, she prefers to simply demonstrate that he is wrong about her. This tells us that Powder has some idea of what her strengths are, and also that she isn't interested in having any kind of argument with Mylo, likely because it will lead to her being insulted further, or in other words, she is afraid of the pain that it will bring. We see that she likes tinkering with scrap and building things, that she is artistic and creative, and she is quite clearly depressed and lonely. Whilst exploring the workshop, Powder notices what appears to be a toy horse, and she puts it in the bag, reinforcing that she is less mature than the others and is not thinking practically. She simply likes the look of the toy, and she wants it, regardless of its purpose or potential value, whereas she is supposed to be stealing things that are specifically valuable. She is also very naive, believing that they kicked the Enforcers' butts in episode 2, which was not exactly an accurate recollection of what happened, and she is repeatedly shown to be highly dependent on Vi, both physically and emotionally. This is likely because Vi is the one person in her life who has never left her. In the workshop, she also finds a music box and says,
I think this is a real Valdiani.
Remember this for when we get to episode 9, and soon afterwards tells Mylo,
What about this?
That's a nose hair trimmer.
This was going to be a point of criticism, as my initial reaction was, how in the hell does Powder know what a nose hair trimmer is? But not only is this explicable once we learn a little more about her, it is also very deliberate. It may initially seem as though something as relatively luxurious as a nose hair trimmer is not something anyone from the Undercity would have any experience with whatsoever, and I had assumed that this was simply the writers allowing Powder to show that she is more intelligent than Mylo gives her credit for, without necessarily caring whether or not it makes complete sense, but we later see that Powder is very gifted when it comes to technology. And she frequently scavenges equipment from the trash, so her knowing what a nose hair trimmer is not at all beyond the realms of possibility. Moments like this make me thoroughly confused whenever people say that you can nitpick any film or TV show into oblivion, because this simply is not true. When you peel back the layers on something like Rings of Power, the depth of its failure becomes more apparent. Things make less sense the more you think about them and the more you explore them. Conversely, when you peel back the layers on something like Arcane, you often find small details that were deliberately inserted and that serve multiple functions so as to focus the story and characters into a cohesive whole. Speaking of, after Powder flees from Deckard's goon, whilst she shows some level of ingenuity, she also gives away her position due to simple clumsiness and a lack of experience. Realizing she is now trapped, she takes a small contraption from her belt that she refers to as Mouser, fills it with nails, and throws it at her pursuer. The fact that Powder names her bombs things like Mouser and Whisker, plus the fact that she talks to them as if they are her friends or pets, reinforces the fact that she is very lonely and feels she doesn't quite fit in with the other three. She is younger, she is treated differently, she can't fight, and she is seen as the annoying, useless kid. To deal with this, she expresses her creativity by making her own friends by turning other people's garbage into pieces of scrap tech, in this case, a nail bomb. The fact that she named the thing Mouser is deliberate. To Powder, this is not a tool, but something personable that she has attached meaning to. Interestingly, and rather disturbingly, if Mouser had actually worked and fulfilled its purpose, it would have been destroyed, which potentially indicates how Powder views her relationships with other people, that they will fulfill a purpose and then leave. The fact that Powder built a nail bomb and turned it into a cute cartoon mouse in the first place is of course a very dark and disturbing thing for a child to do, which also gives us our first hint that something is brewing under the surface. After hearing that Vander had been taken, Powder immediately grabs her bombs without saying a word and waits expectantly to be told what to do. She is ready to help Vander, and she doesn't at all expect that she is going to be left behind. Vi telling her to stay put causes Powder to have a breakdown. This tells her that Vi does not actually believe in her, and cements the idea that she is just a useless kid, and so she begins trashing her bombs that she had worked so hard to create. The fact that the bombs don't work and are therefore useless is a direct reflection of how she feels at this moment. In the process, she recalls that the blue crystals can explode, and she realizes that she may actually be able to help. Powder follows the others to the dockyard, but waits for the right moment to be of use as she watches Vi fight and eventually retreat into the holding cell before preparing her bombs, which is, of course, when everything goes wrong. Until meeting Vi after the fact, Powder was under the belief that she had helped. Her bomb had finally worked. She had proven herself to Vi, and she would now be respected and accepted. I've observed in previous videos that some writers will often try and contrive a way to have an emotional low followed by an emotional high, or vice versa, and this scene right here is an example of how to do this perfectly. Part of what makes this sequence so powerful is that from Powder's perspective, this was probably the best day of her life, until it became the worst day of her life.
Vi, it worked! Did you see me? My monkey bomb finally worked!
You did this?
The crystals that gave her hope ended up causing the deaths of 3 of the 4 closest people to her, and ultimately caused the 4th to abandon her. Powder tries her best to avoid being directly blamed for what happened, by claiming that she was saving Vi, which from her perspective was exactly what she did. That was her intention going into this, and that was her belief until this very moment. And then, as if things were not already bad enough, she sees Clagger's goggles lying on the ground, stained in his blood, and she understands the true depth of her failure. Realizing you have just accidentally killed your father and 2 brothers is going to be incredibly traumatic for anyone, but this moment is particularly agonizing for Powder. Through their extensive setup of each of the characters involved, the writers have tailor-made this particular tragedy so as to hit Powder as hard as fucking possible. She has been trying repeatedly to prove herself, and she has failed every single time. She has been set up from the start as wanting to live up to her sister, to not only avoid disappointing her, but to excel and live up to her potential. She was repeatedly encouraged by Vi not to doubt herself, that she was capable, that she was stronger than she knew, and that her specific strength was her aptitude with technology. Acting on this, she saw the opportunity to prove her worth once and for all, to demonstrate that Vi was wrong for leaving her behind, and to save Vander in the process. She was the hero she knew she could be. She saved her family, and she has proven herself. Her bomb worked spectacularly. And then, in one moment, Powder is destroyed.
I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help.
Her psyche collapses as she repeats desperately that she only wanted to help. She screams at Vi, asking why she left her, only to be told directly that Mylo was right, that she is a jinx. Devastated and now a complete emotional wreck, Powder begs Vi to understand that she didn't mean for this to happen, to reassure her that everything will be okay. But Vi abandons her. Powder is left on her own, for good this time. She has ruined everything, and as loud as she screams, she will not bring her sister back. This final sequence of episode 3 of Arcane is the rare occasion where I find myself in awe. This sequence is near, if not functionally perfect in execution, and as a result, it is emotionally devastating. I will continue talking about this scene when I get to my analysis of Silco, but for now I will briefly touch on why Powder decides to join Silco. I hope I have already provided enough references towards Powder's obliterated mental state to adequately explain this. This isn't simply a case of, well, she's crazy, so I guess she just kind of teams up with the guy who killed her dad or something. This is an irrational decision that only happens because of who Powder is and what she has just been through. Additionally, she is under the belief that her actions directly caused the deaths of Mylo, Clagger, and Vander, which is only partly true. As far as Powder is aware, she killed Vander, not Silco. And if Powder was even capable of thinking straight in this moment, Silco's culpability doesn't change anything. Powder in Act 1 is an incredibly well-developed character. Given where the story goes, nailing this aspect of the show was absolutely critical. The audience has to be able to empathize with Powder despite her future actions. And the audience has to be able to understand Vi's actions with regard to Powder in Acts 2 and 3. Had the writers failed to properly establish who Powder and Vi are and what they mean to each other, then many of the dramatic payoffs in the series would have fallen completely flat. Vi's final scene with Powder in Episode 3 is one of the best pieces of storytelling I have ever seen. And if Vi and Powder were anything less than exceptionally well-crafted characters, this would not have been achievable. Clagger is definitely the most mature of the group. He is very cautious and he questions Vi's plan at multiple points because he is worried about stepping out of line and getting caught.
Vi, are you sure about this? Look, if we get caught,
We're not gonna get caught.
What if Vander finds out we're all the way up here? Vander's gonna kill us.
He is the only notable character in Arcane who does not seem to have a clear moral flaw or weakness. He is contrasted with Mylo in that he is kind and big brotherly towards Powder, and although I am sure Powder appreciates Clagger not behaving like Mylo, this nonetheless serves as a constant reminder to Powder that she needs looking after. Clagger goes out of his way to avoid violence, however, when left with no alternative, he is perhaps the most competent out of the four of them. After Vi antagonizes Deckard, Clagger attempts to defuse the situation.
You're tracking this mess of yours through my streets.
Your streets. What makes you think—
We don't want any trouble, okay?
And it is sad that something as minor as this is worthy of praise given the current state of media. The writers of Arcane are very much aware that Vi and Clagger are characters with a set of beliefs and with defined personalities. And through their reactions, the audience is able to learn what they value and to what degree they value them. Instead of having Clagger tell Vi and the audience, "Oh boy, Vi, you sure are reckless and impulsive," only for Vi to reply, "Yes, Clagger, and you are doubtful and careful," we instead see their personalities play out when they are presented with an obstacle. Clagger is also extremely humble, as when Ekko realizes he was in a fight, he asks,
Oh, did Vi kick their asses?
Yeah, I wouldn't be here otherwise.
even though it was in fact Clagger himself who did the most damage. This is further evidence that the kids in the Undercity look up to Vi, not just Clagger, Mylo, and Powder. And it also tells us that Clagger doesn't seem to have any kind of ego. He just lets Ekko talk about how totally awesome Vi is without caring at all. Overall, Clagger is a somewhat rare ray of sunshine in the world of Arcane, as he seems to be an all-round nice kid. Whilst Clagger isn't exactly complex, I very much appreciate the level of characterization he received, as it allows the writers to use him, along with Mylo, to build the more integral relationship between Vi and Powder. Mylo is frequently sarcastic, he likes to make sure everyone else knows when he is right about something, and he clearly has something to prove. He doesn't ever like to be upstaged, especially not by Powder. He is a bit of an asshole, but there is a lot more to him than the stereotypical annoying little shit archetype. He is shown to be capable of picking locks, he is shown to be less skilled in combat than both Vi and Clagger, not to mention being less skilled at shooting than Powder. He is also overconfident, and he thinks he is smarter than he is. He suggests that Powder should have stuck with them during the fight and taken a punch or two, which is interesting both because Mylo essentially got his ass kicked, and also because Vi had thrown the bag to Powder, presumably so that she could avoid the fight and get herself and the bag to safety. His reaction here, and his behavior in general, is informed by the fact that he is understandably angry after Powder lost all of their loot to save herself whilst he was getting his face turned into porridge. He is very disrespectful and cocky towards the enforcers.
Go ahead, idiots. We got nothing.
But he is also a quick thinker, in that he distracts them without knowing that Powder had the blue crystals they were looking for. He is mostly justified in his view of Powder, and he is absolutely right that she is a liability. Mylo functions primarily as a means of motivating Powder. In order for Powder to do what the plot requires, she needs to have a reason for doing it. The writers needed to firmly establish Powder's lack of confidence and her extreme dependence on Vi, and Mylo is a key part of this. Clagger seems indifferent towards Powder's lack of usefulness. Vi wants Powder to improve and become useful, whereas Mylo seems to only want to remind everyone of how much of a liability she is. Mylo expresses openly what Powder worries that Vi is also thinking. In episode 3, however, Mylo steps up and drops his bratty argumentative demeanor. Upon realizing that Vander had been taken and was in trouble, Mylo immediately says that he and Clagger will go with Vi to rescue him.
Slow down. What's going on? Who took Vander?
I don't know, but I need to help him.
We're going with you.
You're not doing this alone, Vi.
He's our father, too.
When the shit hits the fan, Mylo can be relied on to do the right thing, even if he is a bit of an arrogant asshat the rest of the time. Whilst Vi fights off Silco's men, Mylo struggles to unlock Vander, but ultimately succeeds. Moments later, however, Powder's bomb detonates and Mylo is impaled and thrown into a wall. The last thing he sees before he is crushed by rubble is that Clagger, his brother, is dead. The fact that Mylo was arrogant, cocky, and had a big mouth humanized this character. The fact that Mylo and Clagger were both relatable and believable makes this tragedy that much more effective. Mylo was not one-dimensional bully man who is a dick towards Powder for no reason. He is a relatively simple character, although he is definitely more complex than Clagger, and he serves an extremely important and extremely clear purpose within the story of Arcane. Vander, we learn, was highly driven to fight back against the enforcers in the prologue, but the consequences of doing so made him rethink his path in life. He realized that his actions only led to more pain and suffering, and so he abandoned his mission. Although the fact that he keeps his gauntlets hanging by the bar is notable. Vander may have moved on, but he has not forgotten his past, nor can he escape it. The placing of the gauntlets is likely as much for himself as it is for the patrons of the Last Drop. A reminder and a warning of who the guy who pours the drinks used to be. It is revealed that, years prior, Vander led a revolt with Silco against Piltover, and at some point he betrayed Silco and attempted to kill him. His reason for doing this is only implied, that he disagreed with Silco's methods and felt he needed to stop him before it was too late. In so doing, Vander turned Silco into the utterly ruthless man he is today. Vander wanted the same thing as Silco, and he very likely still does. But he differs from Silco in that he is no longer willing to sacrifice people to achieve this goal, whereas Silco will stop at nothing. Regardless, Vander has never forgiven himself for attempting to murder Silco, and even when given the clear opportunity to finish the job, he cannot bring himself to do so, even after everything Silco has done. Vander acts as a peacekeeper in the Undercity, however it is heavily implied that he is directly involved in criminal activity. It is implied that he collects protection money.
You're a little early. Our guys are still rounding up this month's collections.
And when he hears that Vi has conducted business in Piltover, he does not seem to take issue with the fact that she robbed someone, but specifically that she robbed someone from Piltover.
I also told you time and time again the North Side's off limits. We stay out of Piltover's business.
He is very threatening, he is clearly used to dealing with ruffians, but he seems to have left his violent past entirely behind him. Vander is introduced using the character of Huck, and whilst Huck himself is not particularly important, his interactions with a pair of unsavory tradespeople is an excellent way of sneaking in a bit of world building, whilst also acting as a means of introducing Vander. The short version of the conversation is that Huck is selling something to these traders, and they are attempting to underpay him through intimidation. After they threaten to kill Huck, Vander approaches the table and...
You folks need anything? Leave us. You sure about that? Sounded to me like...
Piss off.
Rather than backing down, he confidently advises the two not to threaten the guy who pours the drinks. This tells us multiple things. Firstly, Vander is very used to dealing with unsavory people through means other than violence. Secondly, the various patrons of the Last Drop, unpleasant though they may be, are absolutely on Vander's side. They respect him. This is potentially in part due to the events seen in the prologue, partly because he is the unofficial peacekeeper and he is the reason why the enforcers do not patrol the streets of the Undercity, and also because, as he suggests, he is the guy who pours the drinks and therefore keeps everyone happy. Which is of course a metaphor for his role as the peacekeeper. Vander has a very clear moral compass, and he tries to impart this wisdom to Vi to prevent her from ending up like her parents.
That path? This? It's not going to solve your problems. Those kids look up to you. You say run, they run. You say swim, they dive in. You say light a fire, they show up with oil. But whatever happens, it's on you. Just like it's on me what happens to us down here.
He holds her to a higher standard than the other kids due to the fact that they look up to her. This directly mirrors Vander's own experiences. Vander feels responsible for all of the deaths that resulted from him leading an attack against the enforcers. His people looked up to him, and he didn't respect that. He was irresponsible, and he may never forgive himself. And right now, he is seeing his own past behavior reflected in Vi. And he is desperately trying to prevent her from making the same mistakes. After Vi directly tells him that if he won't fight against the enforcers, then she will, he takes Vi to the bridge where her parents died in order to steer her away from this path.
I was angry, just like you. I led us across this bridge, thinking things could change. If I hadn't, your parents would still be alive. Nobody wins in war, Vi.
Vander strongly believes violence does not solve problems, it simply adds to them, and he tries to teach this lesson to Vi before it is too late. However, he also asks Vi...
Oh, you did put that idiot on his arse, though, right?
Suggesting that Vander is not in any way a pacifist. If cornered and left with no way out, he has no problem with Vi fighting. Additionally, given that Vander threatened violence against the two traders earlier, plus the fact that he indirectly threatens Marcus...
You weren't always the peacekeeper, were you?
Yeah, well, you can't escape the past. It'd be a shame if I had to put them on again. Cast irons, it's hard to clean.
Potentially indicates a degree of hypocrisy on Vander's part, but also suggests that he doesn't have a moral problem with violence as a tool, under the right circumstances. What he has a tremendous problem with is the proactive use of violence against the wrong target, as it can and will lead to people getting hurt or killed. He believes life in the Undercity is not going to change, and that all he can do is keep the peace as best he can. Arcane deliberately implies something about Vander's arm in episode 1, and it is not until episode 3 that we learn that underneath Vander's vambrace is a stab wound he sustained from Silco when he attempted to drown him. In this scene, Vander tells Benzo that he is worried about the potential for worse things than enforcers, referring to Silco, who at this point has not been introduced to the audience. And the reason he is worried is because Vi told him that someone from their side attacked her, hence him discussing the problem with Benzo. This might seem odd, as Vander is a criminal living in the Undercity, which seems to also be full of criminals and people who are generally violent. Why, then, is Vander worried about someone from the Undercity attacking Vi? Well, one explanation is that everyone in the Undercity seems to know who Vander is, and also seems to know that you absolutely do not fuck with the guy who pours the drinks. By extension, they would also know that Vi, Powder, Clagger, and Mylo are his adoptive children. Whoever attacked them and tried to steal their haul evidently did not care about the potential repercussions, and this is what worries Vander. The Hound of the Underground is more than willing to bark, but he is unwilling to bite. And if this becomes known amongst the people, he will be unable to maintain peace. As far as Vander is aware, all of the stolen goods were lost in the river. As he says to Vi,
He was after the stuff.
Where is it now?
We lost it.
Good. Nothing can tie you to what happened up there.
regardless of this fact, Vander is left with no choice but to turn himself in as a result of Silco informing Marcus that it was Vi who caused the explosion. He considers turning himself in to be his only option. He will not turn Vi in, as this would be a betrayal and would completely ruin her life, and he will not refuse to cooperate with Grayson, as this could lead to a war. Given that Vi had already contacted Grayson, she had inadvertently forced Vander's hand. Had Vi not done this, I believe that Vander may well have taken the same action so as to defuse the situation with the enforcers, but I'm not sure he would have done it this soon. Grayson could have refused to arrest him as she fears what will happen to the Undercity in his absence, but she concedes as Vander appears to have outplayed her, and he reassures her that Benzo will take care of things while he is gone. After the explosion, Vander sees the bodies of Mylo, Clagger, and Vi. None of them are moving. At this point, Vander believes all three are dead. And yet, he still does not fight. Vander could only have assumed that the explosion was intentionally caused by Silco in an effort to open the door, and yet he does not become fueled by rage and revenge over the deaths of his children. He does not return to his old ways, and he does not get up. He does not allow Silco to win, and he does not prove Silco right. He will not let Silco show him who he really is. In this moment, Vander is completely broken and seems to have accepted his fate. He has failed his children, he has failed his people, and Silco is going to take over. Only after Vander realizes Vi is still alive does he begin to fight. He has not lost everything yet. He realizes he still has something to fight for, and this moment is absolutely beautiful. Vander faces down Deckard knowing he can't win, but he doesn't care. He is going to protect what remains of his family. He also decides to go one step further after Silco literally stabs him in the back, and he realizes the only way he can now protect Vi is by ingesting Shimmer. Vander has at this point been pushed to the absolute limit. His values have been tested to the extreme, and his decision to do this shows us with absolute clarity what Vander prioritizes. Vander is willing to drink Silco's evil goo, thus metaphorically becoming the monster he swore he would never become again, and in so doing also proving Silco right.
The only way to defeat a superior enemy is to stop at nothing, become what they fear.
I'm just not that man anymore.
Now I'll show you what you really are. I knew you still had it in you.
Perfection.
Vander does this because he knows he is going to die, but before he dies, he needs to save his daughter. As is made clear by the end of the episode, Vander has no reason to believe Powder was caught or otherwise involved in the explosion, and he knows Powder needs her sister. Vander becomes the weapon Silco wanted him to be in order to save Vi and Powder. And once again, he does not do this in order to get revenge on Silco for fatally stabbing him or for killing Mylo and Clagger, or even necessarily to stop him from carrying out his plan for independence via a violent uprising. He does this to save his daughters. Vander dies shortly after rescuing Vi, and his last words are,
Take care of Powder.
Words that inform his actions in the previous scene, and words that will heavily impact everything Vi does for the rest of the season. In a show packed with fantastic characters, Vander is towards the top of the pile. He is thoroughly developed and explored, deeply flawed, and through his values being constantly challenged in increasingly dramatic ways, we are able to learn who Vander really is. He is a man who loves his children and will sacrifice everything he is to protect them. Marcus is extremely antagonistic towards Vander and the Undercity in general, which is immediately evident due to the fact that when Marcus removes his mask the first time we see him, Vander sighs, evidently having some idea of who he is and what kind of bullshit he is about to have to put up with. He has a very low view of people from the Undercity, referring to them as trencher trash. He also believed that Vander already knew about the explosion, indicating that Marcus considers the Undercity to be a web of interconnected crime that is purposefully driven against Piltover. Although he seems paranoid, in this instance he was absolutely correct. Vander did already know about the explosion, and Vander does know exactly who is responsible. This indicates that although Marcus is definitely prejudiced against certain people, this prejudice is not entirely unfounded, and his worldview is nowhere near as simple as bigoted cop. Marcus serves as a personification of the hostility of Piltover towards the Undercity. He isn't just a guy doing his job, he hates the people who live there. He considers them to be beneath him. They are not worth any level of respect, and they are all criminals. Marcus is potentially shown to be apparently willing to shoot a child from the Undercity to prevent them fleeing. And he does this without the knowledge that they were actually the kids he was looking for. This seems like a bit of a stretch to me, although it is also possible that Marcus intended to use the gun to threaten and or coerce them, but as he never got the chance to fire a shot, this is an open question. Either way, this moment confirms that Marcus is very quick to anger and frequently lets his emotions get the better of him. In episode 2, Marcus receives an invitation to meet with Silco, and he accepts, meeting him alone, as we can presume was the terms of the invitation. Prior to his involvement with Silco, Marcus was not actually a corrupt cop. He was a colossal cockwomble, but he was still doing his job. This meeting, however, leads to them making a deal, and Marcus inadvertently ending up in Silco's pocket. It also directly leads to Vander being forced to turn himself in. One question this raises is how believable is it that Marcus, who hates the Undercity and its people to the point where he will verbally abuse them and have his men throw them through windows when they don't cooperate, and will use a gun to stop a group of children getting away, would be willing to meet with Silco alone? As Marcus makes clear, he doesn't know who Silco is.
You carry your chin so high you fail to see the opportunity below.
Who are you?
One would think that from Marcus's perspective, receiving an invitation from a mysterious individual, even one claiming to have information pertaining to his investigation, could lead to him being abducted, assaulted, or killed. It is possible that Marcus is relying entirely on the idea that the Undercity knows it is royally fucked if they lay so much as a finger on him, although the fact that 4 enforcers die in episode 3 and Piltover evidently doesn't respond particularly thoroughly makes this proposal a little shaky. It is also probable that he is knowingly taking increased risks after being unable to apprehend 4 children and being made a fool of. Either way, Marcus meeting Silco alone indicates that he is either unaware of or dismissive of the inherent danger of doing so. This can be explained by him being embarrassed by his failure to catch the kids earlier that day, plus the fact that he is emotionally volatile and hot-headed, but I'm honestly not quite sure if the writers intended for Marcus to come across as ignorant and negligent during this scene. There is, however, a very simple fix for this. And you came alone, as agreed. Good boy. You really think I would trust a trencher like you? My men are outside in case you do anything stupid. As a mine, boy, as a mine. Now, to business. Anyway, the deal Marcus makes with Silco is off-screen, and I will cover the specifics of the deal later in the plot mechanics section of this video. What I will address here, however, is the fact that Marcus believes Silco indicates that he is very guilty of motivated reasoning. Set aside for the moment the fact that Silco is correct that Vander's kids are the ones Marcus is looking for. Marcus already intensely dislikes Vander. He has also already been made a fool of by Vander's kids. Marcus would almost certainly arrest Vi, Powder, Clagger, and Mylo if he ever saw them again, even had they not been responsible for the explosion. Given the fact that Silco seems to be extremely skilled at manipulation, and given that Marcus would want to believe him, this is another example of Marcus letting his emotions get the better of him when one would, or perhaps should, expect a member of Piltover's law enforcement to be far more practical and pragmatic. This is again evident when Marcus goes to the last drop with 2 other enforcers to arrest 4 children, and he acts very disrespectfully towards Vander in the process, which is both highly egotistical and overconfident.
You people down here are all the same, mistaking arrogance for bravery. But we all know there is a crime behind every coin that passes through this place. You think you're standing up for something?
There are a couple of possibilities when it comes to Marcus. Either he hates the Undercity and uses the fact that many of them are criminals to justify this belief, or he hates criminals, which naturally leads to him being intensely prejudiced against the citizens of the Undercity. As for which is more likely, sorry, I'm blueballing you, we have to wait until Act 2. Marcus is drawn to the dockyard by the explosion in Episode 3, and he ultimately prevents Vi from rescuing Powder. There are a few things to note here. The obvious question is, why the hell does Marcus care what happens to Vi? And I want to offer a couple of points to help explain it. Marcus doesn't like Vi. Vi is the adoptive daughter of Vander, a man who is heavily involved in criminal activity, and a man who does not show any respect to Marcus.
It's exactly who you're picturing in that thick head of yours.
You think my head is thick?
Just past the average.
Listen, you shady son of a...
However, the fact that Silco altered the deal by murdering 4 enforcers and Benzo would suggest to Marcus that Silco can absolutely not be trusted. Meaning that at this point, he may well be far less confident that Vi is actually the person he is looking for. Marcus has also been majorly screwed over by Silco's actions. By intervening and arresting Vi, knowing that Silco intends to kill her, he is fucking with Silco's plans without Silco even knowing. This can perhaps be seen as a way for Marcus to attempt to get even with Silco. Additionally, Marcus might be an arrogant dick nugget who hates the Undercity and its people, but he is not a psychopath. He quite rightly believes that Silco will murder Vi if he doesn't stop her, and so that is why Marcus prevents her from going anywhere near him. Additionally, Marcus wants to be a good person. He just struggles from time to time because he's frankly a bit of a twat. Regardless, his obsession with capturing the culprits from the explosion led him to getting involved with a ruthless crime lord, which led to the deaths of 4 enforcers, including his boss. Marcus is therefore quite likely looking for the chance to redeem himself in any way he can. We don't actually learn what Marcus does with Vi until Act 2, so for now, this is the end of Marcus's story. Marcus becomes a heavily conflicted character in Acts 2 and 3, which isn't really the case in Act 1. And so the writers needed to deliver a lot of character information very efficiently due to Marcus's limited screen time. Marcus undergoes significant growth in between Acts 1 and 2, and for this to be at all coherent, the audience has to properly understand who Marcus is at this point in time. For now, we have only seen the groundwork, and Marcus remains relatively simplistic, but as we will see in Act 2, he will develop into one of the best characters in the show. Grayson functions as the good cop to Marcus's bad cop, and the fact that these two characters have so much personality and function in such a short amount of time is a testament to the skill of the writers. They could very easily have had evil cop man who hates poor people and abuses his authority, and although Marcus initially comes across as perhaps leaning in the direction of being this type of caricature, there is a lot more to him, as we will learn later. Anyway, Grayson is clearly very experienced and is extremely polite with Vander. Although she is working towards conflicting ends, she is not at all hostile to him. Grayson very much mirrors Vander in some ways, and although we learn very little about her past, she is depicted as the exception to the rule when it comes to the enforcers. She wants to avoid needless violence, but she will still use the threat of violence to do her job, just like Vander. She seems to have a lot of respect for Vander, likely due to Vander's active role in preventing conflict with Piltover, and she does not want to cause more trouble than is necessary, offering to quietly arrest the person responsible and not publicly involve Vander at all. She is entirely aware of who Vander is and what he means to the Undercity, which is evident by the fact that she didn't even ask him about the explosion.
You know this crossed the line upstairs.
Was anyone hurt?
She knew he would have already heard before she got there, and so she didn't waste any time. She insists that someone has to go down for the robbery. This is because, as becomes clear later, the workshop was owned by one of the councillors of Piltover. So essentially, Vi stole from the wrong person. Grayson has no choice but to arrest someone. Because although this isn't explicitly stated, Caitlin was also present for the explosion, and she was very lucky she wasn't killed. Caitlin is the daughter of one of the councillors, so there is no way in hell her mother will accept anything less. The fact that Grayson says that if she does not arrest the culprit tonight, she will have to return with an army of enforcers suggests potentially that this was the council's original plan, to go in guns blazing and overpower the people of the Undercity. The fact that Grayson and Marcus came in alone and attempted to resolve things quietly and without bloodshed potentially indicates that Grayson was given the chance to do this so as to avoid violence. Only when Vander refuses to turn over Vi does she say, "Look, you don't understand, either you give me who I want or people are going to get hurt." Grayson's characterization is very deliberate, with her acting as the sole exception to the enforcers being portrayed outright as the antagonists. This allows the writers to properly explore the characters on both sides of the conflict in a more mature way, rather than simply having one side be the goodies and the other side be the baddies. In episode 2, Grayson is shown to be very intelligent and pragmatic, questioning the council on whether pursuing the culprits will make things better or worse, further indicating that she does not want to antagonize the Undercity unnecessarily. She also becomes furious with Marcus for going to the last drop without her knowledge, believing Marcus's actions will lead to inevitable violence as he has just provoked the people of the Undercity. She is the personification of order on the side of Piltover, and her death at the beginning of episode 3 is extremely effective. Silco has just drastically changed the status quo in a few seconds. By the end of the episode, the peacekeepers for both Piltover and the Undercity are dead, which serves as a precursor for what is to come. Overall, Grayson, like Marcus, is an absolutely fantastic character, despite them appearing on screen for only 12 minutes each in Act 1. Initially, I had mixed feelings about Silco's introduction in the closing minutes of episode 1. Silco is presented as an almost comically one-dimensional mustache-twirling villain with an evil robot eye who lives in an evil, spooky underwater lair and plans to take over the world with his evil monster goo. Given that Silco ends up being one of the most nuanced characters in the show, I have to assume that this was deliberate, and that the writers were trying to throw us off. There is a lot to Silco, and for now I'm going to focus on his characterization. I will get to the mechanics of his evil plan later in the video. Silco is depicted as extremely ambitious and having many spies throughout the Undercity. He is a man of incredible power and will, despite, as he says, not being born strong, fast, or smart. Everything he has earned, which parallels Vander's belief, as stated to Vi.
You're the one who always says we have to earn our place in this world.
Which is the first extremely subtle hint that Silco and Vander have some kind of history. Silco believes that power is taken by the ones who will do anything to achieve it, and he plans to use this power to turn the Undercity into the nation of Zorn, and to be free from the oversight of Piltover. Silco wants to be respected and wants the opportunity for both himself and the Undercity to succeed, and he knows this will not be possible whilst it remains under the thumb of Piltover. His pursuit of this goal resulted in his attempted murder at the hands of Vander years prior, an event that Silco only survived due to his immense willpower, which cemented Silco as the man he is today. Vander inadvertently taught him how far he would need to go in order to achieve his goal.
The only way to defeat a superior enemy is to stop at nothing, become what they fear.
This tells us that Silco considered Vander to be superior to him, certainly physically, but also potentially morally, as Vander was unwilling to cross certain lines, indicating that Silco likely knew that what he was doing was wrong. but he considered it necessary. Silco rewards people who are loyal and/or useful to him. He is very opportunistic, and he repeatedly demonstrates that he is highly intelligent. He is shown to be excellent at manipulating people, as seen with Deckard, Marcus, and his attempts at swaying Vander.
We have the power. We can finally realize our dream, brother.
Silco uses violence to get what he wants, as he strongly believes Piltover will listen to nothing else. This is apparent when he murders 4 enforcers and Benzo to abduct Vander, plus the fact that he was willing to murder all of Vander's children. He considers these to be acceptable losses in the grand scheme of things, and a worthwhile sacrifice in the pursuit of independence. We learn that Silco had the respect of Vander and the Lanes, and Vander implies that this wasn't enough for him, suggesting that Silco became too ambitious, too greedy, and went too far in his efforts to establish the nation of Zorn. Silco continued to respect Vander even after the betrayal and attempted murder, but this respect vanished when Vander made a deal with the enforcers, indicating that Silco considered this to be the true betrayal. A betrayal of their cause. This is all fantastic characterization because it portrays Silco as a complex, driven, and ultimately human character. He is not, as I had worried after his introduction in episode 1, a larger-than-life supervillain who wants to take over the world. He simply wants the Undercity to gain sovereignty. He is willing to do very bad things to achieve this, but everything he does is in service of something that he ultimately considers to be good. He appears furious that Vander is willing to die for his cause, to become a martyr so that the Undercity can continue to live in relative peace, but he is not willing to fight, which Silco views as weakness, disgusting him, as he knew Vander's potential. Silco tries to tempt Vander into drinking Shimmer to become a weapon against Piltover. He knew how formidable Vander was, and so this was his last-ditch attempt at giving Vander the opportunity to revert to his old ways and, in Silco's eyes, to redeem himself for making a deal with their enemy. Of course, Vander has no reason to do this beyond perhaps saving himself, and given that Vander is a changed man, he refuses. After Vander is forced to defend Vi by arming himself for the first time in years, Silco stabs Vander, realizing Vander will never rejoin him. Despite this, he still declares his admiration for Vander attempting to take on Deckard.
I knew you still had it in you.
Silco wanted to prove to Vander that he was still capable of being the formidable fighter he was back in the day, and in Vander's last moments, he proves him right. After Vander jumps out of the window with Vi, Silco follows to make sure everyone is dead, as he can't have any loose ends. He is faced with a whimpering Powder and readies his knife. Silco then changes his mind and decides to speak to her. And I'm going to take a moment to explore why he did this. Silco is utterly ruthless, and his objective was to remove Vander and his children from play so that he can essentially take over unimpeded. Murdering a child is absolutely not beyond him, as seen earlier when he directly told Locke to kill Vi, and when he stated twice that this was his intention.
Have you heard the rumor? Vander the coward fled town with his children, and they were never seen again.
Let it go! This is between you and me!
You had your chance!
The reason Silco opts not to murder Powder is not because he is incapable of murdering a child. One reason he does this is that he does not actually need to kill Powder. Vi was the primary obstacle for him, and she has apparently run off, meaning that his plan to cover everything up by claiming that Vander ran away with his kids is no longer viable. So Powder does not need to die because that plan is already proverbially out the window. Another reason he does not kill Powder is because he respected who Vander once was, and showing mercy to his only remaining child could be seen as him continuing to show respect to Vander even after his death. Another reason is that Silco doesn't have any kids of his own, and he perhaps wanted the opportunity to mold someone in his own image. Those are the potential reasons as to why Silco took the first step and put his knife away.
She is not my sister anymore.
The reason why he ultimately adopts Powder is because he realizes that she has been betrayed by her sister, just as Silco had previously been betrayed by his brother. He sees a direct link between the two of them, and he wants to be there for Powder in a way that no one was there for him. Silco is not motivated entirely out of his own self-interest. It is not as simple as him wanting to get a new recruit or manipulate Powder into becoming a weapon, as he had attempted to do with Vander. Silco genuinely takes pity on Powder because he knows more than anyone exactly what she is feeling at this moment. He reassures her that everything will be okay, and tells her,
"It's okay. We'll show them. We will show them all."
And that is where we leave Silco at the end of Act 1. Silco is simply a fascinatingly detailed character. He is meticulous, extremely threatening, but also very understandable. His methods are abhorrent and his morals are objectionable, but it remains entirely consistent that this character would end up making these decisions. Silco's total screen time in Act 1 is barely 23 minutes. And yet the writers managed to deliver so much fantastic characterization in a very short amount of time. Silco, as with most of the characters in Arcane, is leagues ahead of virtually every other character I have analyzed in detail at this point, in terms of both complexity and consistency. And the writers managed to accomplish this in less than half of the time that we spent with Elendil and Theo in Rings of Power. And the cherry on top? We are only a third of the way through Silco's journey at this point. Jayce is introduced to us in episode 2. He is relatively simple at first, but as with Marcus, Jayce ends up being extremely well developed by the end of the season. We are shown almost immediately what Jayce's core motivation is. He wants to use science to harness the incredible power of magic, and he wants to use this power to help people and change the world for the better. Regarding Jayce's backstory, I have mixed feelings. I absolutely love the core concept that he was stranded or lost in the snow with his mother, and then a mysterious person rescued them by teleporting them out of the blizzard using magic. This is very purposeful and explains Jayce's fascination with magic as well as his drive to try and help people extremely clearly, quickly, and artistically. This flashback is essentially exposition, although no words are spoken, and the content of the flashback, I think, is excellent. However, the way the show delivers this flashback to us is that Jayce is knocked unconscious by the explosion. We then see the flashback take place, and then the show cuts to the intro credits. Or, in other words, Jayce gets a bonk on the head, and then the writers decide to use this as an excuse to directly tell the audience Jayce's backstory. One alternative explanation, which I do not buy, is that Jayce was dreaming about these events immediately after being knocked unconscious, and we are then seeing his thoughts play out. An alternative approach would have been the Zack Snyder approach. To have Caitlin say, "Hey Jayce, you sure do like magic," which would then give Jayce the opportunity to explain why he likes magic. I am obviously not at all suggesting that this would have been an improvement, but my guess is that the reason why the writers used the bonk on the head flashback was so as to avoid having potentially clunky dialogue to allow Jayce to explain his backstory. The problem I have with the bonk on the head flashback is that it is simply the writers cutting away in order to directly deliver what is essentially exposition to the audience. We don't get any information from the delivery mechanism. We don't learn about Jayce by how he describes his backstory to another character, for example, which incidentally is precisely how we learn about Viktor's backstory. Jayce's backstory is definitely necessary in order to clearly set up his actions. However, the writers could have avoided this rather overt exposition by removing the opening 30 seconds or so of episode 2. Rather than having Jayce walk up to the workshop door and get blasted, the episode could have opened with the flashback. Much like the flashback in episode 1, it would have had absolutely no context at the time. However, when we later see the crystal Jayce kept, it would become clear that he was the child in the flashback. The only reason I'm even mentioning this flashback as a point of criticism is because of how excellent the rest of Arcane is with regard to exploring character motives by having the characters speak to each other. The let's bonk Jayce on the head and then show the audience his backstory method is, by comparison, a step down. Anyway, although Jayce initially appears to be virtually flawless, eternally optimistic, and always trying to do the right thing, there are nuances that suggest that he is more complex than this golden boy archetype. He did not have permits for much of his equipment, which either means that he was ignorant and was so single-mindedly driven towards helping people that he didn't realize that he was breaking the law, or that he did know but didn't care. He takes great risks and interferes with power that he does not fully understand, despite multiple warnings from his superiors. He goes on to commit further crimes after he is encouraged to by Viktor, despite his initial reservations about breaking into Heimerdinger's vault. He also naively believes that developing incredibly powerful artificial magic will not lead to any unforeseen negative consequences, provided it is placed in the right hands. A perspective that he later demonstrates when he successfully convinces Mel to help them by arguing that someone is going to develop hex tech, and in order to ensure it is done responsibly, it should be done by the right people, himself and Viktor.
We, the pioneers of science, can use it for good. We're the champions of discovery. Why fear it when we can master it? This technology, it's going to change our world. We should be the ones to lead it.
Jayce doesn't care how dangerous the technology is, as he foolishly believes that he will be able to control who wields it. However, rightly or wrongly, Jayce is almost obsessed with his goal of using magic to help people, and he wears the gem from Rise on his wrist as a reminder of what magic can do in the right hands. He also has extremely humble origins, as his family is stated to be a lower house, and this likely informs his desire to change the world and make it better for everyone. He is so dedicated to this goal that he disobeys Heimerdinger, despite respecting him immensely. He is willing to risk the consequences of this in order to be honest to the council and potentially achieve his goal. Upon being faced with the realization that he can never continue his research, as his mother has in his eyes betrayed him and his patrons have cut ties with him, Jayce contemplates suicide before being rescued by Viktor.
Am I interrupting? The hell's your problem?
Jayce is not my favorite character in Act 1. There is nothing particularly wrong with him, and his writing is top tier, as of course is tradition. However, I feel both he and his plot are outshone by the Vander Silco plot in Act 1. This isn't a problem with the series as a whole, however, as virtually everything that happens as a part of Jayce's storyline in Act 1 serves as a setup for Acts 2 and 3, where Jayce goes on to face some serious moral conundrums. Viktor was originally from the Undercity and is entirely self-made, now acting as Heimerdinger's assistant. He seems very calm and is highly interested in Jayce's work, as he believes it will change the world for the better. The fact that he is willing to team up with Jayce and help him continue his research against the wishes of his own boss is an indicator of how strongly Viktor feels it is the right thing to do. Yet again, the writers of Arcane give us extremely clear characterization by showing us what Viktor values and to what degree he values it. He explains to Jayce and the audience a bit about his backstory, and the justification for this is that Viktor is empathizing with Jayce after catching him apparently preparing to kill himself. And he is attempting to convince him that they can still work together and develop something incredible.
No one believed me.
Nobody's ever believed in me. Poor cripple from the Undercity. I didn't have the benefits of a patron or a name. I simply believed in myself, which is why I'm here. Because I think you're onto something.
Viktor has worked his entire life to go from a nobody from the Undercity to Heimerdinger's assistant, making Viktor one of the most powerful people in Piltover. And he is nonetheless willing to risk all of this in pursuit of furthering Jayce's research. He claims that his life's dream is not to be an assistant, but to be a scientist on the verge of discovery and to make the world a better place. This, of course, is precisely what Jayce wants, and so it is not outside of the realms of possibility that Viktor is subtly manipulating Jayce here by telling him exactly what he wants to hear. I am not suggesting that Viktor is acting maliciously. I'm rather highlighting that Viktor's motive for wanting to help is not entirely clear until Act 2, and his claimed reason for helping fits perhaps a little too neatly. The reason Viktor is so driven to research hex tech is that he has been a cripple for his entire life and seeks to restore the use of his leg. This is absolutely understandable, although it is inherently a selfish goal. Given how obsessive Viktor becomes, again understandably so, I think it is entirely possible that his primary objective is not to help other people, it is to help himself. And if other people benefit, then win-win. This obsession begins in Act 1, as he directly encourages Jayce to commit further crimes so that they can continue their research. He also seems to take the lead with the experiments, reassuring Jayce that it will work.
I don't think it's gonna hold! Look at the buildup!
The resonance will stabilize it. Trust me.
Showing that he is clearly more willing than Jayce to take risks. Viktor's decision to help Jayce I have absolutely no problem with, nor do I have a problem with the fact that they hit a major breakthrough almost immediately after teaming up.
I thought I needed to dampen the oscillations.
The crystals will only stabilize at high frequency.
We can reasonably infer that Viktor, as Heimerdinger's assistant, was more intimately knowledgeable about this kind of magic than the average scientist, given that Heimerdinger was actively trying to prevent its inception, and so Viktor may well have realized how close Jayce was to letting the genie out of the bottle, and so decided to help push him over the finish line. What I do have a slight problem with is the time frame. More on that later. When caught by Mel, Viktor half-assedly says,
"Wait a minute, it's
what a surprise.
my bedroom?"
See you.
How could I have...
Which is not only pretty hilarious, but also carries with it some implications. The idea that Viktor mistook Heimerdinger's vault for his bedroom is obviously absurd, hence the joke. So why did Viktor bother saying this? He isn't an idiot, and neither is Mel. At this point, Viktor has come across as somewhat carefree and laid back, never taking anything particularly seriously.
Hey, be careful with that, please.
I believe someone should have said that earlier. He sent me here to ensure that anything dangerous is removed, which, according to my list, includes you. Am I interrupting? You signed your notes. Every page, I might add. A little egotistical. When you're going to change the world, don't ask for permission.
We could test it if we had access to my equipment.
Which is being destroyed tomorrow.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I meant to tell you. Yeah, locked away in Heimerdinger's lab.
No.
He clearly does not care what Mel thinks. He has already chosen his path, and he strongly believes that what he and Jayce are doing is the right thing to do. Given that, previously, when he was in the vault with Heimerdinger, he was told to lock up, this means that Viktor didn't necessarily steal the keys to the vault. And given that he is Heimerdinger's assistant, it is quite probable that he is allowed access. Mel presumably knows this, which is why she doesn't directly address Viktor, as he isn't doing anything wrong outside of the fact that Jayce is with him. If I am correct about Viktor having the freedom to access Heimerdinger's vault as and when he wants to, which I think is probably a reasonable assumption, then this raises the question as to why Jayce is there. If Viktor could simply go to the vault and take what they need without risking Jayce getting them caught. This is probably a concession that the writers knowingly made in order to allow for the interaction with Mel that leads directly into Act 2. And additionally, given that they wind up proving their research at the end of Act 1, this means that Jayce's presence here doesn't actually alter the progression of the narrative. Additionally, potentially more amusingly, Viktor wanted Mel to think he was bringing Jayce back to his bedroom, which suggests that he was screwing with Jayce and potentially wanted Mel to think he was gay, presumably because he found it funny, further indicating that Viktor, at this point, is not particularly serious. Heimerdinger is notably quirky and whimsical, which is something of a first for Arcane. However, when matters become more serious, he drops this jovial attitude completely. He is not simply the goofy science guy, which was a worry I had coming from the game, as Heimerdinger is a champion I find both ridiculous and hilarious, and I also find him very entertaining to play, even though I'm absolutely fucking terrible at doing so.
Ah, the sweet smell of science.
Heimerdinger is incredibly cautious with regard to both science and magic, based on his 307 years of experience. He strongly believes there need to be boundaries on research and experimentation, and this core belief is likely why he ended up as both the head of the council and as the dean of the Academy of Science. He feels responsible for Piltover in a way no one else does, and he explicitly states,
No great science should ever put lives in danger.
Which is very idealistic and somewhat naive. He believes Jayce and his research could be dangerous and so attempts to preemptively course-correct him. But he does not explain to Jayce why he should abandon his research until after Jayce's outburst at the trial. He simply says, "Trust me, bro, it's for the best." And his treating Jayce essentially like a child directly results in Jayce defending his work in front of the council, without understanding why it is so dangerous. Heimerdinger is absolutely terrified of the destructive power of magic, and he also seems to believe that it may actually be possible to create magic using the blue crystals.
Could you stabilize it?
Me? Why would I? That only leads to more problems.
Heimerdinger will recognize the potential.
He already does. It scares him.
The very fact that Jayce was probably onto something was what worried him so much. We can reasonably infer that this exact scenario may have happened multiple times before. Some plucky young upstart was getting dangerously close to discovering or inventing some world-changing technology and was then prevented from doing so by Heimerdinger. I will get back to this idea when I cover Act 2. Heimerdinger is, however, not vindictive. Given that he is the most powerful person in Piltover and takes on a massive degree of responsibility for the city, he could easily have called for Jayce's banishment alongside the other councillors in order to protect Piltover. However, he claims to be sympathetic towards Jayce's dream to change the world, possibly indicating that he sees his younger self in Jayce, and he takes a risk by voting against the other councillors and allowing Jayce to remain in the city. After failing to prevent Jayce and Viktor from conducting further unsanctioned research, he is notably shocked and impressed by their results, despite the fact that Viktor stole from him and the fact that both of them broke the law in the process.
You've actually done it. But just because it can be done doesn't mean...
This is likely due to the fact that Heimerdinger is, at his core, a scientist, and he was witnessing what was likely the most important technological breakthrough of his lifetime. Heimerdinger's actions are entirely understandable despite him being the primary antagonist for Jayce in Act 1. Where Jayce wants to take risks and create a better tomorrow, Heimerdinger believes that they are already living in the better tomorrow, and to go any further would be a pointless endeavor. Mel plays a minor role in Act 1, but she becomes incredibly important later. She is established immediately as both the richest person in Piltover, but also the poorest Medada.
They wished me to remind you that it's thanks to their innovations that you are the richest person in Piltover.
Yet I remain the poorest Medada.
Which tells the audience within the first 10 seconds that Mel is not from Piltover, that her family live elsewhere, and that her family are obscenely wealthy by Piltover standards. Mel believes in constant technological advancement. Her first words are literally,
"Steady is stagnant, Allura."
She wants to revolutionize Piltover and seems to be driven entirely by a philanthropic desire to help people, as she herself is already incredibly rich and yet she has no interest in resting on her laurels. This is notable as it is the direct opposite of Viktor's values. Mel wants to help other people primarily, and if she also benefits, then good for her. Whereas Viktor wants to help himself, and if other people benefit, then good for them. One key difference between Mel and Viktor that explains this is that Mel is incredibly affluent. She is unbelievably wealthy, comes from a high-status family, and has the luxury of being able to put other people before herself. Viktor, on the other hand, well, I guess I have to blew your other ball. We must wait until Act 2 to explore that. Anyway, Mel is willing to take risks, and this plus her aptitude for manipulation is likely how she became the richest person in Piltover. Speaking of manipulation, Mel is seen buying a child's toy for Councillor Hoskel's birthday, believing correctly that Hoskel is a bit of an idiot. This indicates that she has a sense of humor and likes fucking with people less intelligent than her. She demonstrates multiple times that she knows how to push people's buttons. She baits Jayce into revealing his intentions in order to serve her own ends, and she uses the fact that she got Hoskel a birthday present to manipulate his vote in Jayce's trial. This also means, rather amusingly, that had Mel not bought Hoskel a children's toy for his birthday, then it is not unlikely that Jayce would have been banished and Hextech would not have been discovered. which of course means that much of the story grinds to a halt. She admires Jayce's conviction in risking exile to prove the potential of his research, and after being further impressed by his results, she suggests that it is time for Piltover to enter the era of magic. Mel is definitely a minor character in Act 1, however, she is very effectively and extremely efficiently set up for the series going forwards. We understand immediately what she wants, and we also get to see some of the methods that she is willing to use to achieve her goals. I don't find Mel particularly interesting in Act 1, but in Act 2, things definitely get a bit spicier. Ekko, also known as Little Man, doesn't really have much in the way of characterization in Act 1, and he is primarily used as a storytelling tool to allow the plot to move in a certain direction. That isn't to say this is entirely unjustified, as rather than simply having Ekko spy on people every few scenes and leave it at that, the writers made sure to actually build some semblance of a character out of this kid who likes following people. Ekko likes tinkering with junk, and he appears to be close friends with Powder. He gave Vi a tip that there was a whole bunch of valuable science stuff in Jayce's workshop, and he knew this because Jayce, whom he described as a weirdo, came to Benzo's shop to buy a whole load of valuable science stuff.
Wait, Vi, how the hell did we find this place?
It was a tip from Little Man.
Where did you even get this tip?
Little man.
Hey, so how'd you find that place anyway?
This weirdo came into the shop.
But how did you know where he lived?
Followed him.
Meaning that Ekko has very quickly been established as an opportunist, and we will see this come up again later in the series, I am sure. He clearly looks up to Vi, potentially indicating that this was his motivation for following Jayce in the first place, to impress her. He is very resourceful, however he is also terrible at keeping secrets. In episode 3, we see him act with enough pragmatism and clarity to follow Silco and find out where Vander had been taken, despite the fact that he had just witnessed Benzo, his boss and potentially his adoptive father, being murdered in the streets. Ekko is pretty thin as characters go, particularly when compared to the other characters in Arcane. He isn't bad by any means, and he is nowhere close to contradictory. It is more so that he only really seems to serve one purpose, a purpose that he fulfills no fewer than 4 times in Act 1. To follow people, to spy on them, and to then feed this information to Vi. Sevika is another character with very little screen time who goes on to become more important later. She primarily acts as a personification of the Undercity's wavering faith in Vander's leadership. She is eager to strike back at the Enforcers and defend the Undercity. She wants Vander to fight, and when he refuses, she declares that he is weak. The writers introduce Sevika as an individual with this perspective so as to represent the people as a whole. We later see that she has aligned herself with Silco, likely because she believes he will actually do something about the Enforcers encroaching into the Undercity. This is an excellent piece of storytelling as it, again, serves to represent the turmoil within the Undercity. Vander can't keep the peace anymore, so the people need to turn elsewhere. She is shown to place Silco's life before her own, resulting in her losing an arm. Small things like this are what give relatively minor characters a degree of complexity and depth. Sevika doesn't really know Silco at this point, but she believes in him. The fact that Sevika was willing to die to protect Silco indicates very clearly that victory against the Enforcers is more important to her than her own life. Sevika is, again, simple, but as with virtually all of the minor characters in Arcane, she is extremely deliberate in her function within the story. We know as much as we need to for the character to serve her purpose, and although she doesn't develop into a particularly complex character later in the series, she is nonetheless extremely important. Benzo has a long history with Vander and runs a pawn shop in the Undercity. He is held in very high regard by Vander, being possibly the only person Vander told about his deal with Grayson, and he was trusted by Vander to keep the peace after Vander turned himself in. He is killed by Deckard when he antagonizes Silco, although Silco would almost certainly have killed him anyway given his objective. Benzo is very simple, but honestly I wish we got more time with him because he is a very likable character who was very entertaining for the few minutes that we spent with him. And the final character I'm going to talk about now is Deckard. The rest of the characters play extremely minor parts in Act 1, so I will cover them in more detail in either Part 2 or Part 3. Deckard is very simple and primarily functions as a plot device. He was given a job to do by Silco, but he was so full of himself that he decided to try and take the goods from Vi anyway. His behavior here also allowed the writers to quickly establish how desperate and brutal life is on their side of the river. He is clearly out of his depth in being associated with Silco, and the fact that he submits and drinks the vial of Shimmer indicates that he perhaps doesn't have anything to lose, and he simply wants to be powerful, which is possibly informed by the fact that he just got his ass kicked by a girl. After this point, he becomes a dribbling wreck that moonlights as a giant purple rage monster, and he ultimately dies at the hands of another giant purple rage monster. So even though Deckard is very simple, he still has a personality and a very clear purpose. Deckard may not be memorable, but he is still absolutely functional. Much like the characters, the world building of Arcane is generally fantastic. The writers managed to bring the audience up to speed on what is essentially an entirely new setting very quickly, partly by employing show don't tell, but also by using dialogue to accomplish multiple things at once. Episode 1 of Arcane is localized almost entirely to the Undercity, and although we see Piltover, we do not explore it until Episode 2. Nonetheless, we learn a lot about the two cities, and we get frequent hints of a larger world existing outside of this particular story. Firstly, a note on what we get about the history of these two cities. Vi says that Vander used to pull these kinds of jobs when he was younger, which tells us that the disparity in wealth between Piltover and the Undercity has been the status quo for decades at a minimum. Nothing has meaningfully changed. They have tried in the past and have failed. We see that the Undercity is vastly outmatched by Piltover. The Enforcers are armed with rifles and somewhat high-tech armor and gas masks, whereas Vander wears no armor, and his weapon is a pair of scrap metal gauntlets. The Undercity notably does not appear to have access to any kind of firearms, presumably because Piltover will not allow this, which then informs Silco's development of Shimmer. The first glimpse we get as to what life is like on the other side of the river is when we meet Deckard. Friends are hard to come by, and you will be screwed over by people just as desperate as you. As they enter the Undercity, we very quickly get a sense of the kind of place it is. People appear to be very suspicious of each other. There doesn't appear to be any kind of order or law enforcement. People are sleeping on the streets. There are strange masked figures, theft, caged animals, weapons, brothels, and general debauchery. At the risk of stating the obvious, this is not a nice place. This is the opposite of what little we have seen of Piltover in just about every way. The Enforcers do occasionally enter the Undercity to actively pursue criminals, as Vi explains to Powder that Clagger got stuck in a canal whilst running from them. This suggests that Grayson coming down to talk to Vander in Episode 1, rather than simply sending in the troops, is an anomaly, and that Grayson was perhaps aware of how explosive this particular situation was, pun very much intended. We get a few references suggesting that the two traders trying to swindle Huck are not locals. They didn't recognize Vander, the woman describes what Vander is smoking as vile, and they seem unaware of the fact that whilst the Undercity as a whole may be a wretched hive of scum and villainy, in the last drop there is some level of integrity and order. These two traders don't even have names, and yet we learn quite a lot about them. But given that they never show up again, perhaps more importantly, we learn about Vander through them. The show essentially uses a conversation between three extremely minor characters to sneak in a bit of world building before using them to introduce us to the character of Vander. This kind of thing is a hallmark of good writing as it serves multiple purposes. It is very efficient, and it is constantly delivering information to the audience entirely through dialogue. Moving on, the weirdo, later revealed to be Jayce, paid in gold for the goods at Benzo's shop, rather than bartering with other goods. He also didn't haggle, as he presumably didn't know that that is how trading is done in the Undercity, and not only did he not realize that Ekko had charged him double, he also had no problem paying the increased amount. This is firstly a very subtle way of introducing the character of Jayce before he is seen by the audience or even named, but also serves as a more general means by which to illustrate the cultural differences between the two societies, and drive home the idea that people from Piltover do not have to worry about being able to put food on the table. When we explore Piltover in episode 2, we get a nice additional slab of world building. It is extremely subtly implied that scientists have greater authority than law enforcement, as we see Viktor nod to Grayson that she needs to arrest Jayce, which is perhaps appropriate for Piltover, the city of progress. Piltover is extravagant, and much of the extravagance serves no practical purpose, which directly contrasts it with the Undercity. Piltover seems to be a utopia, although from the outside looking in, we can see that it is by no means perfect. We learn that magic is incredibly powerful and seemingly very rare. Mages are not commonplace whatsoever. Indeed, the only mage that appears in Season 1 is Rise, and he only appears in a flashback. Magic has been used on more than one occasion to devastating and genocidal effect, prompting extreme caution on the part of the Council of Piltover. We also learn that Piltover was specifically founded by people who had escaped the warmongering of mages. Magic is also established as being something you are usually born with. It is a force of nature and cannot be controlled by science. And what makes Jayce's research so groundbreaking is that he is trying to be the first person to create artificial magic. In Piltover, the average citizen is incredibly wealthy by Undercity standards. The various houses provide financial support to scientists, researchers, and inventors, and the general outlook is that of growth, advancement, and improvement. Piltover is governed by a council, and the various councillors seem to have varying levels of intelligence, altruism, and general interest in the well-being of their citizens. They appear to spend a lot of time inflating each other's egos, and they generally seem extremely simplistic in their view of the Undercity. With the exception of Mel, the entirety of the council are terrified by the idea that the Undercity may have stolen dangerous technology from Jayce's workshop, and although they are, in this instance, quite right to be cautious, their reaction indicates that they are often very heavy-handed in their punishment of dissidents. Piltover also has public trials, likely intended to dissuade other citizens from breaching the ethos, which is not elaborated on, but is presumably a set of laws. One world-building development that made me raise one eyebrow, followed shortly by the other, is that Jayce and Viktor figured out how to stabilize the crystals in one day. This, I think, is an oversight, as this suggests that creating hex tech is relatively easy for two intelligent people to casually do in a few hours. Given how powerful this stuff is, given that Piltover is the city of scientific development, and therefore we can absolutely assume that this has never been done by any other scientist in any other city, I wouldn't have found it unbelievable if it took them years to do this. Months? Sure, I wouldn't bring this up if it took them months. Weeks? Days? One single day? This is where things get a bit silly, and this is something I think could have been accounted for. The reason why this development is accelerated in the narrative is for pacing reasons. It allows for the Jayce story to have some kind of climax in Act 1, as had Jayce and Viktor spent a year working on it, then the breakthrough would have happened sometime during the time jump between episodes 3 and 4. Additionally, had they spent a year breaking the law, then it would have strained believability as to how they never got caught, meaning that it would have required major changes to the story, such as that Jayce and Viktor fled Piltover with his research and equipment and then maybe contacted Mel after they had successfully stabilized the crystals. When we are first introduced to Jayce in episode 2, we can assume that he has been working on this idea for a while, potentially a few years.
Who authorized your research?
It was an independent study. I believe I've discovered something truly incredible. I'm close to a breakthrough, I know it.
Given that he has only just gone to Benzo's to acquire equipment that will allow him to experiment on the crystals, this would suggest, however, that he has only acquired them very recently. He strongly believes that the crystals are the key to creating magic, but he is unable to prove his theory due to the break-in and him being arrested. At the start of episode 3, we see Jayce and Viktor have a bit of a breakthrough, which is one of two things that allows this plot point to function. The other is Viktor's theory that he presents in episode 5 that magic speaks through the user, and that it has some kind of mental component, which is what appears to happen with Jayce in episode 3. He recalls what he saw Rise doing when he was rescued, he focuses his mind on what he wants to happen, and it happens. However, the fact that the show gives us a specific timeline in this instance detracts from its believability, as Mel goes on to give Jayce and Viktor one night to prove their theory, which they of course do. Heimerdinger also explicitly stated after the trial that Jayce's equipment would be disposed of in the morning, meaning that Jayce went from "these crystals can probably be used to create magic" to functionally using a crystal to do precisely that in under 24 hours. Again, I don't have a problem with Viktor being the missing link that causes a breakthrough in Jayce's research, nor do I have a problem with them stabilizing the crystals and using science to create magic. My criticism is aimed strictly at the time frame, and my grounds for criticizing the time frame are that we are repeatedly shown how powerful, rare, and dangerous this technology is. Harnessing hex tech can be likened to harnessing nuclear energy. It has incredible destructive potential which is so terrifying to people like Heimerdinger that they don't consider its other uses to be worth the inherent risk. As we later see in Act 2, it completely changes Piltover's status within the world of Runeterra, and whilst I can't say that this is impossible, as we are firmly in the territory of sci-fi fantasy technology here, I will say that the relative ease by which Hextech is created does not entirely fit with Heimerdinger's reaction, the tremendous impact it has on Piltover and the world at large as seen in Acts 2 and 3, and it also makes the rarity of magic less believable as a whole. The plot of Arcane and the mechanics that make it function is true to form, generally excellent. However, if I were to pinpoint the weakest part of the show, it would probably be the plot. I am now going to explore some of the important plot beats in Act 1 of Arcane and work out what was good, what was great, and what potentially could have been improved. And to be absolutely clear, none of what I am about to say should be taken as any indication that anything about Arcane is bad, or anything close to bad. The plot is mostly excellent, but that doesn't mean there aren't a handful of moments that potentially could have been tightened up. Aside from establishing the various characters and the world, Episode 1 also needed to set up the blue crystals. In a less well-written show, the writers may well have simply had Vi and co head to the workshop in Piltover and, oh, would you look at that, there's some crystals, and leave it at that. What they added to make this scenario more explicable and to therefore deepen the realism of the setting via coherent cause and effect is that the reason she targeted this particular workshop was because Ekko had tipped her off. The reason Ekko knew about it is because he thought the owner was a sucker with a shitload of money, and so he followed him home, presumably believing him to be a very easy target with a very high potential payout. All of this is absolutely within character for Ekko, and bear in mind, in Episode 1, when all of this setup happens, Ekko has barely 3 minutes of screen time. We don't really know anything about him, but the writers make sure we know enough so as to be able to believe the actions he takes. Powder taking the crystals is the event that sets up virtually all of the conflict in Arcane, so this making sense is incredibly important. The audience needs to understand why it happened. So, why did Powder take the crystals? Powder found the crystals inside a closed chest in Jayce's bedroom, outside of the main workshop, and I think this is sufficient grounds to suggest that she assumed them to be valuable to some degree, although I will note that the chest not also being locked is perhaps a little strange. We also know that Powder is very naive and wants to prove her usefulness to Vi, and so her being the one to find the chest full of magic crystals no doubt would have been seen as the opportunity to do so. This is further supported when at the end of Episode 1, Powder excitedly reveals to Vi that she still has the crystals.
These were in my pocket. They're from the apartment.
Why did Powder take the crystals? She wanted to prove her worth, she thought they might be valuable, and quite simply, she thought they were cool, which absolutely fits with her character. After the robbery, Powder hears Vi say,
Don't bullshit me. We're twice the person at half your age.
You know what, Mylo? You're right. There's a bunch of things Powder just can't do.
Which prompts Powder to get very upset and leave, as she has just heard her sister explicitly state that she agrees with Mylo, who has been giving her shit since their opening scene. However, Vi then continues,
Like complain about everything and brag nonstop. Fights with the group when we need to focus. And tell strangers on the street that we got a nice call.
meaning that she is actually telling Mylo to stop being an asshole rather than accepting that Powder is a liability. This is definitely an instance of a convenience, as Powder not only eavesdrops on the conversation at exactly the right time, but she also leaves at just the right time so as to come away from the conversation with the worst possible perspective, that her sister is only pretending to stick up for her. Despite this being convenient, this is mitigated by the fact that the reason why Vi and Mylo are having this conversation is entirely character-driven. Mylo is alone with Vi and is taking the opportunity to make his thoughts on Powder known. Again, which is totally in character. Vi responding the way that she does is also in character, as she acknowledges that Powder is a problem, but that she is specifically her problem. Remember, this is shortly after her conversation with Vander, in which she was told,
"Those kids look up to you.
Yeah, I know.
You know, but you don't know. Whatever happens, it's on you."
She accepts that although Powder made mistakes, she is young and less experienced than the rest of them. Mylo, on the other hand, made multiple mistakes and has no such excuse, which Vi rightfully calls him out for. This is not an instance of, and then Powder heard Vi tell Mylo how useless she is, because there are multiple moving parts at play here that are important, not just the outcome of the scene. Meaning that the fact that this moment relies on accidentally good timing is far less of a problem. Additionally, Powder overhearing Vi and Mylo is an important character moment for Powder. However, it does not directly affect the plot, as it is resolved a few minutes later.
What's the point? It ruined everything.
Nobody said that.
No, just that you were twice the person at half my age.
This convenience only facilitates Powder directly challenging Vi, whereas without this scene, she has still been called useless multiple times by Mylo, which provides more than enough reason for her to be depressed and frustrated by her own inadequacy. If the writers wanted to, they could absolutely have had this final scene with Vi and Powder, where Vi goes out of her way to motivate Powder and make sure she knows that she is on her side, without having the previous scene where Powder overhears the conversation with Mylo. The function the eavesdropping moment serves is to push Powder down even further than she already was, so that when Vi tells her,
Mylo's wrong, Powder. You're stronger than you think.
It is a more impactful moment, both for Powder and for the audience, because we have gone from a big low to a big high, rather than from a moderate low to a big high. The second scene does not rely at all on the convenience of the first in order to exist and fulfill its purpose, and for this reason, I don't really have any kind of problem with the fact that it was lucky for Powder to hear what she heard. Additionally, Vander going to Benzo's with Clagger and not Mylo allows for this conflict to happen. As if he had taken Mylo with him instead, then Clagger would absolutely not be having a similar conversation with Vi. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, well, alright, fine, I guess the writers just made Vander decide to take Clagger with him so that they can then have the scene of Mylo and Vi alone together, but the writers even thought of this. To be clear, Vander is presented with Mylo and Clagger, both of whom have misbehaved, and he needs to go and visit Benzo. He could have just picked one of his adoptive sons and said, "Oi you, let's go," which is what I had assumed is what happened. However, this was likely not a random decision made by Vander that just so happens to allow the plot to happen. There is a reason why Vander took Clagger with him and not Mylo.
Nobody comes in.
Clagger, you see, is an absolute beefcake Chad lad who is going to be far more effective at guarding a door than Mylo would be. This is extremely minor, but again, this is an instance of Arcane having an extremely solid grasp on who its characters are. Grayson and Marcus arriving specifically at Benzo's is interesting, as there is no immediately obvious reason why they did this, and the plot relies heavily upon this event taking place. There are a few things to think about, however. One reason for them being here specifically is because Jayce had been to Benzo's previously, and so he may well have directed the enforcers to retrace his steps. Another thing to consider is the fact that Benzo's shop is a pawn shop, and so this is likely where any stolen goods may end up. And another aspect is that Grayson's objective here is to speak to Vander. This brings us to another potential convenience. Vander, the person Grayson needs to speak to, just so happens to be at Benzo's at the same time for entirely unrelated reasons. Vander did not agree to meet Grayson at Benzo's. He is here entirely of his own accord, to speak to his friend about the inevitable trouble coming their way. However, as with the eavesdropping convenience, there are multiple defenses of this. Grayson and Marcus could plausibly have gone to Benzo's regardless of them needing to speak to Vander, as Benzo's is a pawn shop and they are looking for the stolen goods. But their other objective is to speak to the person responsible. This requires that Grayson speak to Vander, as she has some kind of history with him, and she believes correctly that Vander knows who did it. Given her relationship with Vander, she will absolutely have been aware of Benzo's friendship with him, and had Vander not been here, she could very easily have told Benzo that she needed to speak with him. In other words, had the writers avoided what is ostensibly a moment of convenient storytelling by having the enforcers arrive 5 minutes after Vander had gone home, we would have had a scene of Grayson telling Benzo, "Hey Benzo, I'm looking for some stolen goods, and also I need to speak to Vander," or something to that effect. Therefore, the convenience of having Vander also just so happen to be at Benzo's for unrelated reasons right when Grayson arrives only speeds things up. It does not fundamentally change anything, and the story does not rely on this convenience in order to progress. In episode 2, we have a couple of moments that gave me pause. Marcus accidentally finding Vi, Powder, Mylo, and Clagger in the arcade. This is also a convenience, as the enforcers just so happened to throw a guy through the window of the place they were hiding. However, there are a few things that mitigate this. Marcus did not know at this point that Vi was responsible, and he did not know that Powder had stolen the crystals. Vi had also specifically chosen this particular hiding spot due to the fact that the enforcers never go there.
Vander said to lay low. Enforcers never come down here, so this is as good a place as any.
However, due to the severity of the situation, Marcus has unexpectedly done precisely this. Vander did say to Vi that she needed to lay low for a while. However, after realizing that Grayson was going to send enforcers into the Undercity to find the people responsible, I would have thought it reasonable for Vander to tell Vi, "Don't use your regular hiding spots, the enforcers are going to be checking everywhere." One way around this is if this is taking place immediately after episode 1, which would mean that Vander has not had the chance to relay this information to Vi, which is certainly possible. So, given that there is apparently an army of enforcers scouring the Undercity looking for them, I don't really have any kind of fundamental problem with them being discovered. The fact that it is Marcus specifically who finds them, however, makes this convenience seem to be more lucky/unlucky than it actually is. Had Marcus not been present and it was just 3 rando enforcers, then exactly the same thing would have happened, and the enforcers would then have told Marcus about it after the fact, meaning that, once again, having Marcus be present simply speeds things up, rather than fundamentally altering the narrative progression of the show. Additionally, there aren't any notable consequences for this particular convenience. The plot does not at all hinge upon Marcus nearly catching them, outside of a potential explanation as to why he decided to meet Silco, and so I don't consider this convenience particularly damaging to Arcane as a whole. Ekko showing up to save them as they flee the enforcers, however, is a second convenience within the same sequence, and this one I have much less of a defense for. The only thing we can fall back on here is that Ekko was following them and saw everything that happened, but for some reason wasn't chilling with his friends inside the arcade. Yes, Ekko has been established as being one who follows people and spies on them, but either way, this is still the writers handing Vi a get-out-of-jail-free card. If I was being particularly picky and I wanted to polish this story from being absolutely fantastic to being even more absolutely goddamn fantastica, I would cut or change this chase scene. Keep the character work in the arcade. Keep Marcus interrogating the locals. Change him accidentally finding the kids and having them being rescued in the nick of time by Ekko. have Ekko arrive at the arcade specifically to warn them that there are enforcers nearby, and then as they try to escape, they are seen by Marcus and the chase begins. At the start of episode 3, Vander surprises Vi by arriving at Benzo's in order to take her place.
How did you find me?
I'm proud of you. Always have been.
How exactly did Vander know that Vi was attempting to turn herself in, and how did he know that she would be at Benzo's? Unlike the previous plot moments I have mentioned, this moment critically changes the trajectory of the show, so it simply needs to make sense. If Vander just kind of guessed at what Vi was doing and then just kind of, went to Benzo's and, oh snap, there she is, what are the odds of that, then this damages the plot of Arcane, because everything that happens afterwards becomes contingent upon Vander accidentally going to the same location as Vi, and, critically, managing to do so before she is picked up by the enforcers. This one is a little complex and appeared to me to be the first genuine flaw with the plot of Arcane. But, after some extensive toing and froing, I think I have worked out a way to make this function without relying on things that are not present in the show. So, Vander could well have noticed that the message tube to contact Grayson was missing. We saw him rolling it back and forth on the bar, so he appears to keep the thing on him. He will also have noticed that Vi is missing, and he also noticed that Vi has rescued her bunny and given it to Powder. I know I haven't covered the bunny in this video, but I will when I get to Act 3. He likely then recalled their conversation on the bridge, put 2 and 2 together, and realized what Vi intends to do. Vander is not going to allow Vi to turn herself in, which makes perfect sense given his characterization, and so he decides to stop her. So far, so good. The characters are behaving consistently. The next piece of the puzzle, then, is why did Vi tell Grayson to pick her up at Benzo's as opposed to anywhere else? This one requires some speculation. It is possible that Vi chose Benzo's knowing that Grayson had been there before and so knew where it was. And we can reasonably assume that Vi learned this information from Ekko, despite it occurring off-screen.
Vander's gotta deal with the enforcers.
What deal?
In isolation, Vi specifically deciding to meet Grayson at Benzo's is not a problem, because she has a reason to choose this location, despite this reason not actually being explicitly stated in the show. However, the final piece of the puzzle is how did Vander know that Vi was at Benzo's? Going literally by what the show tells us, the only possible explanation is that Vander realized what Vi was going to do and then correctly guessed that she would have gone to Benzo's because he correctly assumed that Vi would have selected Benzo's as her meeting spot with Grayson. Vander could plausibly have guessed that Vi would have specifically chosen Benzo's because Vander knew at this point that Vi was aware of his deal with Grayson and the fact that he met with her previously at Benzo's.
What I don't understand is how you can work with them.
In other words, Vi knows about Vander and Grayson's meeting, and Vander knows that Vi knows. This explanation is not explicit. However, it is drawn entirely from the information each character has, and so the plot is able to progress without the writers having characters know things that they can't know. Given how critical this moment is to the plot, I do think the writers could have done more here to make this interaction a little less confusing.
How did you find me?
I have this uncontrollable urge to follow you.
One option, for example, would be in the scene in episode 1 where Grayson meets Vander and gives him the message tube, to have her quickly write the message saying something like, "I agree to bring the culprits to Benzo's to be arrested," which would then make clear that Grayson is expecting someone to be delivered specifically to Benzo's. Another option would be to show Ekko repairing a message tube in Benzo's rather than a random clock thing, which would establish Benzo's as a location where Vi could send the message capsule from, and would then explain clearly how Vander knew where she had gone. So despite this plot point being somewhat less clear than I feel it should have been, this is another example of Arcane making more sense and becoming more satisfying as a story the more you dig into it. On first watch, I didn't notice this plot point as a potential question mark, but on repeat viewings, I started asking questions and wondered if it did actually have a logical through line. Only after digging into it properly for this video did I discover that, yes, it can be explained entirely using information presented in the show. meaning that although the writers for some reason did not explain how Vander knew where Vi was, they still included enough information for the audience to be able to work this out for themselves. Shimmer is rather important to the plot of Arcane, so how exactly is it shown to work? Yes, I know, I'm about to start discussing the internal mechanics of magic evil purple rage goo in a fantasy show about science wizards intended for League of Legends neckbeards, but if you have got this far into this video, I don't know what else you were expecting, so I will neither apologize nor will I ask for forgiveness. On the face of it, if you inject a small amount into your eye, it will act as a kind of steroid and pain relief, and if you ingest a large amount of it into your digestive system, you turn into a giant purple rage monster. But this doesn't seem to be quite as simple as making the person lose all control and start attacking everything in sight. Deckard still listens to Silco after hulking out, and Vander considers attacking Silco before deciding to save Vi. So I don't believe that there is any kind of hard-coded mind control component to Shimmer, as this would require a little too much suspension of disbelief. I think it is far more explicable if the subject remains somewhat conscious and aware of their own actions. Why then did Deckard continue to obey Silco when he could simply squash him? Because Shimmer's other property is that it is highly addictive, and as Silco controls the supply, he also controls the addicts. Deckard could have attacked Silco and Singed during his first transformation, either because he is now a brainless killing machine or because he consciously decided to kill them and take over or something. And as Silco didn't appear to have any kind of countermeasures in place, there is no immediately obvious way that he could have prevented Deckard from doing precisely this. This can only mean that Deckard remaining somehow conscious and obedient was expected. We have to read between the lines a bit here because there are still some holes that need plugging. The fact that Deckard said,
No, it'll kill me,
means that he knew what this stuff was. This means he must have either spoken to Silco's men about Shimmer, or that he was present for further experiments on animals. Either way, Deckard evidently knew what Shimmer was, and he had some idea of what it would do to him. This, I think, is sufficient to plug the potential hole of why Deckard did not voluntarily attack Silco, because he honestly would have no reason to. The hole that remains very much unfilled is Silco's lack of countermeasures. Until testing Shimmer on Deckard, it had only been tested on animals. The animal we see ingest Shimmer appears to simply become a violent killing machine. As far as I can tell, there is no way Silco or Singed could have known that a person ingesting Shimmer would not murderfuck the living shit out of everything in sight. Deckard is the first human test subject, meaning that they are absolutely in uncharted waters here. Which means that Silco is hinging the entirety of his plan on the presumption that Shimmer will do exactly what he needs it to do on the first try. There is one potential way out of this, however, that does not damage Silco as a character. As Silco says to Deckard,
real power doesn't come to those who are born strongest. It comes to those who will do anything to achieve it.
Which goes some lengths to justifying his actions. If we assume that Silco did not have any means by which to restrain a shimmered up Deckard, such as a giant cage, which I think is a bit of a stretch, then this would mean that, yes, Silco is risking his life, but he is doing so because from his perspective, he does not have a choice, and he does not deal in half measures. He needs Shimmer to be ready now, and he has the will to take the necessary risks to achieve his goals. Finally, on the topic of plot mechanics, I am going to explore Silco's plan in Act 1. His ultimate goal is to establish independence for the Undercity and turn it into its own sovereign nation, Zorn. He knows Vander will not permit this to happen, as this would require a war against Piltover, so Silco needs to either bring Vander on side or remove him from the equation, which is what motivates essentially everything Silco does in Act 1. So, from the start, when we first see him, Silco has been biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity to kick things into gear. He has been developing and refining Shimmer, which he intends to use both as a means of controlling the population of the Undercity and also as a weapon against the Enforcers. He has multiple spies and agents, such as Deckard, who was under orders to keep tabs on Vi. We can also reasonably assume that he has spies inside the last drop, keeping an eye on Vander. At this point, Silco is patiently waiting for a weakness to reveal itself, which it does.
The kids! The explosion in the upper city! The topsiders are up in arms looking for him!
Vander's in trouble.
Silco then sets things in motion. He tests Shimmer on Deckard, and it works as intended. He then arranges a meeting with Marcus, and the fact that he met specifically with Marcus is no accident. As becomes clear, Silco knew a great deal about Marcus prior to meeting him.
You see, that's your weakness, Marcus. You carry your chin so high, you fail to see the opportunity below.
Indicating that he targeted Marcus specifically due to his abrasive disposition towards the Undercity, and quite possibly also due to the state of his family. Stay tuned for part 2. Marcus is extremely hostile, and at this point, this hostility is exactly what Silco needs. So the deal Silco makes with Marcus is off-screen, but we have enough references to work out what the deal was. Silco informed Marcus that the culprits he is looking for are Vander's kids, as Silco tells him,
"I'm about to make your day."
And immediately afterwards, Marcus heads to the last drop to arrest them. However, this is evidently not the only deal that was made, as in episode 3, Marcus exclaims,
"What the hell have you done? This wasn't the deal!"
Which wouldn't make sense if their only deal involved arresting the children. Silco therefore must have had some kind of arrangement with Marcus involving Vander, which is why Silco is the one to invite Marcus to meet with him initially. Vander is Silco's ultimate goal, but he throws the kids in as well so as to establish a degree of trust with Marcus. From Silco's perspective, there are multiple things that can reasonably happen next based on the knowledge that Marcus's objective is to arrest the culprits. Either Marcus goes to the last drop and arrests them, or Vander gets in the way, causing either a fight, an arrest, or further escalation of enforcer activity, or he is unable to locate the kids at the last drop, but due to his volatile nature, he inevitably causes more trouble and stirs up further resentment towards the enforcers. Whether Marcus is able to arrest the kids is irrelevant. Silco has directed an arrogant asshole of an enforcer into the last drop, and whichever way this goes, it will only benefit him. Had Marcus actually managed to arrest the kids, Silco would have expected Vander to join the fight once again, to put the gloves back on, as the entire reason he took them off to begin with was to look after the kids. By having the kids imprisoned in Piltover, Silco will have forced Vander into a situation where their goals align once more. Of course, Marcus is not able to arrest the kids as they manage to evade him, but the mess he predictably makes in the last drop further leads to people losing faith in Vander's leadership.
Vi, where you been?
Rumor is the Lanes are gonna fight.
What ends up happening, which Silco presumably did not expect, is that Vander turns himself in to save the children. This changes Silco's plan. He no longer needs Marcus, and he uses this opportunity to abduct Vander himself. And at this point, his intention is to have Vander back on side against the enforcers.
I had no choice.
Perhaps. But now you do.
The odds of Vander voluntarily joining Silco are virtually nil, of which Silco is quite aware, and so he intends to torture Vander until he breaks. Either Vander will die in the process and will be justly punished for his weakness and his betrayal of their cause, or he will see the error of his ways and join Silco. As far as Silco is aware at this point, this part of his plan is finished, and there are no loose ends. He will continue to produce Shimmer, slowly gain influence over the Undercity in Vander's absence, and further his pursuit of independence. When he killed Grayson and intercepted Vander, Silco took Vander away to a secret location. The only person he knowingly left alive was Marcus. He did not know that both Vi and Ekko saw the whole thing, and he did not know that Ekko had followed him. This means that Silco did not kidnap Vander in order to bait the kids into coming to rescue him. He kidnapped Vander solely in an attempt to torture/manipulate him into joining his side. Given what ended up happening, it is highly likely that one of Silco's lookouts saw the kids coming, and so he ordered his guards to stand down and allow them inside so as to then spring the trap.
Have you heard the rumor? Vander the coward fled town with his children, and they were never seen again.
Once he realized Vander's kids were coming to rescue him, Silco took advantage of this and decided to kill them all. and then claimed that Vander and the children had left the Undercity for good to get away from the enforcers after the explosion, which, given the circumstances and the wavering public opinion regarding Vander, would have been more than plausible. In Silco's original plan, he did not intend to kill any enforcers, but once his plan involved intercepting Vander, this became a necessity. Killing Grayson also implicates Marcus in a serious crime, which then helps to ensure that Marcus will keep quiet. Marcus made a deal with the devil then murdered his boss, and now in order to protect himself, Marcus has to keep his mouth shut and let the devil do his work. I have analyzed a handful of evil plans on this channel as part of my coverage of Rings of Power, The Hobbit, Rebel Moon, and, I guess, Barbie, but that's another story. And it is very refreshing to find one that is not only coherent, but is exceptional in its detail, its clarity, and its adaptability. Silco demonstrates through his actions how formidable he is, what lines he will cross, and the lengths he will go to achieve his goal. He has multiple contingencies, and he has manipulated the circumstances so that virtually any outcome will benefit him. You may be wondering, if Vander is standing in the way of Silco's goal of creating the nation of Zorn, then why not simply kill him? He has Shimmer, he also appears to have multiple spies and ready access to all kinds of questionable individuals, so why not just juice Deckard up to the gills and point him in the direction of the last drop? There are a couple of reasons, and this part in particular is where I think Silco truly shines. If he has Vander killed by a giant purple rage monster, Vander becomes a martyr. If he kills Vander and his children in secret whilst they are being hunted by enforcers, the far more plausible explanation would be that he skipped town to protect his family. This would paint Vander as a coward, shatter what he claimed to stand for, and would remove the Peacekeeper from the Undercity. Additionally, his plan allows for him to manipulate an enforcer into his pocket, which is a very valuable asset to have. There are a couple of things that Silco could not have seen coming, and so he could not have accounted for them. Firstly, he could not have known that it would have been Grayson, the sheriff, that would arrive to personally make the arrest. By killing her, as opposed to some other random enforcer, he has inadvertently also removed the Peacekeeper from the enforcers. Both Vander and Grayson are now dead, meaning that there is no one left who is actively trying to prevent a war. Secondly, he did not foresee that powder would arrive and blow up half a building by accident. This explosion caught Marcus's attention, and Marcus being present directly results in Vi's life being saved. Had powder not turned up and Vi still managed to somehow survive, Silco could feasibly have had her assassinated after the fact. This also, rather poetically, means that Powder's actions in episode 3 killed Vander, Clagger, and Mylo, but they also saved Vi. Is there anything so undoing as a daughter? We will find out in Acts 2 and 3. In this next segment, I have a handful of things I want to bring up regarding how Arcane tells its story, which I think are worth highlighting. There is virtually no dialogue that functions purely as exposition. There is no, hey guys, we need to get the MacGuffin and stand in just the right spot, otherwise the dinosaurs will go back in time.
But how do we get the MacGuffin? It's guarded by Laserman.
Well, Laserman's weakness is contrived storytelling, so let's invite him over to watch every blockbuster film from the last decade. There is obviously exposition in Arcane, but it is a byproduct of the show exploring the characters and having them speak to each other, by challenging them and by forcing them to change. Anyway, first off, in the burglary sequence in episode 1, the tension was gradually dialed up very effectively, but never by damaging the intelligence of any of the characters or the believability of the setting. Firstly, they are on their way to rob someone, which is inherently a risky thing to do.
We'll be in and out before anyone notices.
Then Vi implies that this particular robbery is special.
Gotta stay out of sight for this one.
Mylo then notes that the balcony door is locked.
Who locks their balcony?
Clagger notes that there are lots of guards nearby.
Tons of enforcers down there.
Means we're in the right place.
Mylo discovers a strange blue crystal.
Guys?
Clagger asks Vi how she knew about this place.
How the hell did we find this place?
And then Powder finds 6 more of the crystals right before Jayce returns to the workshop. As Powder pockets the crystals and runs, one of them falls to the floor and... The show drip feeds information to the audience in a natural way to inform us of both the characters and the world, but also to make us become increasingly uneasy about the circumstances the characters have found themselves in. We also repeatedly see Powder to be the one to make mistakes, which leads to added tension as the audience is gradually conditioned into expecting her to make a mistake and ruin everything, which is why the scene where they hide from the enforcers focuses specifically on her. Moving on, we have absolutely no idea why Jayce and his mum were lost in a blizzard. Maybe she was fleeing a conflict and trying to save her son. Maybe she was a colossal idiot and got lost in the mountains whilst going for a morning walk. We can only speculate, but as it is not relevant to this particular story, I will not speculate further as to the potential character implications of this. One part that I do think was genuinely a mistake, however, is when Heimerdinger says,
"You don't understand what's at stake, but how can you? That's a burden that only I here carry."
And he says this moments after Bulbuck says that his race was almost wiped out by magic.
"The Arcane is the curse of our world. My race was nearly destroyed by it."
I think this was simply a mistake, and Heimerdinger should have instead acknowledged that Bulbuck is also intimately aware of the devastating potential for magic in the wrong hands.
"My race was nearly destroyed by it."
That's a burden that only I here carry.
Still not listening.
The vast majority of the time when a character is present for a scene, it is directly justified in their dialogue. And the justifying dialogue is never as simple as, "Hello, I am Father Figure, and I am here to father your figure." The dialogue always serves multiple purposes. Or, in other words, Arcane is the polar opposite of Rebel Moon, a film in which the words the characters say only ever have one single meaning, and oftentimes that one single meaning is utter fucking nonsense. Although I have highlighted a few conveniences, the writers generally go out of their way to not only avoid doing this, but they also use this opportunity to explore the setting as well as develop the characters. In some cases, also developing characters that are not present. Why is Viktor at Jayce's lab after the explosion, despite not being a member of law enforcement? Because Heimerdinger sent him there for character-driven reasons. Why is Powder accompanying Vi on a burglary that she clearly isn't ready for? Because Vi specifically wanted her to come for character-driven reasons. Why is Deckard waiting to ambush Vi? Because Silco sent him there again for character-driven reasons. Compare all of that to this. Why is Viktor at Jayce's lab? Because I get science or something? I don't know. Why is Powder accompanying Vi on a burglary? Oh, because Vi is an idiot for bringing her liability of a sister along for the ride. Why is Deckard waiting to ambush Vi? Because he's lucky? Yeah, things can be lucky. That happens, right? There are also a couple of instances where characters tell other characters things that they already know. Generally, when this happens, it is a lazy means for the writers to inject information into the audience's brain, brought on by them not being able to think of a justified reason for a character to deliver this piece of information, and so they settle for an unjustified reason and hope no one will notice. The first instance is when Elora tells Mel that she is the richest person in Piltover, which she would of course already know.
They wished me to remind you that it's thanks to their innovations that you're the richest person in Piltover.
The purpose of this is to inform the audience, as this is their introduction to Mel. Why then do the writers get away with this? Well, the context is that Elora received a letter from House Pharos saying essentially, "Business is good, we made you rich, piss off." This exchange contains multiple useful bits of information, and although Mel, of course, already knows she is the richest person in Piltover, the fact that Elora is communicating this information to her on behalf of House Pharos is perfectly justifiable due to the context. This also happens when Grayson tells Vander something he already knows.
"We had a deal, Vander. You keep your people off my street, and I stay out of your business."
The defense of this is that she is reminding him what their deal was, as he has evidently failed to uphold his end. However, the reason this happens narratively is so that Ekko can hear this piece of information whilst spying on them, which leads to him telling Vi, and Vi asking Vander why he made a deal with the enforcers. Which is actually the second example of Arcane having someone luckily hear a piece of information, but then resolving the resultant conflict very quickly without being melodramatic. The convenient timing is used to allow the writers to explore the characters, and it is not drawn out for half a season so as to build to some melodramatic climax that was built on random chance. Could they have explored the characters without the convenient timing? Probably. But to be honest, in a show as good as Arcane, I am not going to rip on the writers for taking the occasional shortcut. Again, if this kind of thing is the biggest flaw with your story, you have written a damn good story. A quick warning for this next bit: if you are unfamiliar with League of Legends and you don't want potential spoilers for character arcs that might be explored in Seasons 2 and beyond, then skip ahead to this point in the video. So, it is very much true to say of Arcane that watching it with game knowledge is a fundamentally different experience than without. The most obvious way this matters is that the characters from the game have a level of plot armor, and so League of Legends players will subconsciously presume that Ekko and Caitlyn, for example, are not going to die, or at least they aren't going to die in Season 1. I'm going to save the plot armor discussion for part 2 or 3, however, as there is only really one example of this in Act 1. This is a little unfortunate, however, because Arcane does not hold back on killing off major characters. So to someone who has not played League of Legends, I am sure the tension will have been even higher during those scenes. Additionally, League of Legends players will have some idea of where each character's arc may lead them. Viktor is going to turn into a robot. Vi and Caitlyn will become enforcers. Powder will become Jinx. Heimerdinger will accept Hextech and use it as a weapon. Jayce will make a giant hammer and hit people with it. Ekko will do wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey bullshit and outplay you by rolling his face on the keyboard. All of this is inevitable when adapting pre-existing worlds or characters, but there is one moment in Arcane where my familiarity with League of Legends made me start to get rather worried during a critical scene. The final 20 minutes or so of episode 3 is extremely emotionally effective, as I have already been into. However, when Vander falls off the bridge and is surrounded by bottles of Shimmer, the place my brain immediately went to was, please, for the love of God, don't let this be a Dr. Mundo origin story. Mundo! For those who don't know, Dr. Mundo is a very silly champion in League of Legends. He is a big purple monster with some very entertaining voice lines.
Medical school. Yes, Mundo probably went there. 1 bajillion drops of Healy juice stat! Anyone seen Mundo's brain scissors? Mundo not remember Mundo before Mundo was Mundo.
There isn't really anything the writers of Arcane could have done to avoid this particular comparison, apart from maybe making Shimmer green or orange instead of purple. And so I don't consider this to be a problem whatsoever, but I do think it's something worth mentioning, as this misread came about entirely due to my familiarity with the source. In stark contrast to many modern stories, Arcane is one of consequence. The show is highly focused on its characters, and they are often forced to take actions that have unforeseen consequences. Consequences that usually have a great impact upon them as people. As a very quick aside, if you haven't seen my coverage of Rings of Power, there are no fewer than 28 character decisions that serve as plot points for which there are absolutely no consequences. In Rings of Power, when a character gets themselves in trouble, the world or the other characters will more often than not contort themselves so as to get the character out of trouble, usually entirely inexplicably. This kind of thing is a problem because it means there is no sense of cause and effect, and without a sense of cause and effect, what is ostensibly a story will wind up feeling like random bullshit happening because the writers said so. Arcane, on the other hand, excels in this department. Here are a handful of examples from Act 1. The consequences for Vander leading a rebellion against Piltover are that many people are killed, including Vi and Powder's parents. This directly affects him as a character. The consequences for Vi bringing Powder on a job she is not ready for is that they lose all of their loot, with the exception of the crystals, which also wouldn't have been taken if not for Powder. The consequences for Deckard trying to earn an extra bit of cash are that he is manipulated into becoming a Shimmer-addicted monstrosity and is then killed. The consequences for Jayce's mother Xymena getting lost in the snow with her son are that she loses 2 of her fingers to frostbite. The consequences for Vander's refusal to fight back against the Enforcers are that his people lose faith in him, and in the case of Sevika, directly align themselves with Silco. The consequences for Jayce speaking up about magic in front of the council, directly against Heimerdinger's wishes, are that he is expelled from the academy and all but driven to suicide. The consequences for Vander attempting to kill Silco are that Silco becomes the very thing Vander wanted to prevent. The consequences for Marcus making a deal with Silco in order to catch Vi are that 4 enforcers are murdered and he is trapped in Silco's pocket. The consequences for Vi disobeying Vander and robbing Jayce's workshop, and the consequences for Vander's own refusal to turn in Vi, are that Vander is forced to turn himself over to the Enforcers, and this would have had further consequences on the state of the Undercity if not for Silco's surprise involvement. The consequences for Heimerdinger treating Jayce like a child and never adequately explaining why he is afraid of his research are that Jayce is forced to break the law once again in order to attempt to prove the validity of his work to Mel. And possibly most importantly, the consequences for Vi telling Powder to stay at home are that Powder feels the need to prove herself and inadvertently causes the deaths of Mylo and Clagger and prevents them from being able to save Vander. Had Vi brought Powder with her on the mission, this would not have happened. One example of what could be considered a character avoiding the consequences for their actions is when Jayce breaks the law and is expelled from the academy and loses his patronship, only to then be seemingly welcomed back after proving himself at the end of episode 3. This only happens because of Viktor's involvement, plus the fact that they were able to stabilize Hextech in less than a day. However, Viktor's involvement is entirely consistent with his character, meaning that the writers aren't simply having Jayce avoid the consequences of his actions entirely unjustifiably. There is not a cynical bone in Arcane's body. This show is inspired by the characters and world from a free-to-play video game that does not have characters and does not have a world. The game can reductively be described as an arena where you kill each other. Stories, characters, and world building are not a part of League of Legends, or at least they are not a part of the core gameplay experience. All the producers of Arcane had to work with was the designs, the aesthetic style, and very rough backstories for the champions that you can play as. Although Arcane does contain plenty of Easter eggs, it would have been painfully easy for Arcane to simply do a Disney and trot out Master Yi, because look guys, it's Master Yi, he's gonna do the Wuju thing. And oh look guys, look, it's Annie, she has a Tibbers, isn't that cool? And oh look, it's Yasuo, he goes Hasaki and then everyone dies. Alright, sorry, I've never played Yasuo because honestly, fuck that champion. My point is that the show would very likely have been successful had they simply pandered and dangled the things we know from the game in front of our faces. Case in point, The Mandalorian. Audiences lap that shit up. They seemingly can't get enough of it. In a shocking turn of events, however, the people behind Arcane actually care about telling a story, and the end result speaks for itself. They are not rushing anything. They are taking the time and putting the effort in to establish what will, hopefully, be a high-quality, long-running TV series. Let's be honest here, the reason Riot wanted to make a League of Legends TV show in the first place was to get people to play League of Legends. And the reason they want people to play League of Legends is to get them to buy skins. Arcane is an advert for League of Legends skins, but I don't care. If the end result is a TV show this fucking good, I don't care how cynical the initial spark was. Arcane has absolutely no right being as good as it is. Arcane has a story to tell, and as is evident from these first 3 episodes, and as I will continue to explore in the future installments of this series, holy shit is it a story worth telling. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy the video, please drop me a like, share it, subscribe, and all the other pleasantries. The nature of the YouTube algorithm means that negatively slanted media coverage usually gets far more attention and views, and it would be nice if this series doesn't get punished too hard for not playing into the kind of negativity bias that YouTube rewards. I am taking a bit of a risk covering something like Arcane in this amount of detail, but as you can hopefully tell, I am heavily invested in the series and I do care about it a lot. And my objective is, as always, to make good videos that people enjoy, so hopefully I will have succeeded on that front. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in part 2. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Yes. Oh,
yes!
no.
Oh my fucking god, I actually got it!
Yes.
Oh my god, did Jayce a solo kill?
I got a solo kill on a champion I've never played before against a champion that I don't know what he does.
Wiggle.
Wake up to the sounds of the misery.
Yeah, that's the wrong way.
Oh man.
We've all been there.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Oh my god, even when I do the wind wall the wrong way. This champion is broken. I'm not sure what that ability does, but that's okay. Gadzooks. He's gone. I got one.
Nice.
Fucking there is, dude.
Him.
And he's gone. Hatsaki!
Yes. Get him.
Fuck! Oh well. Right, can we kill a Zawawe? Yes. Oh, come on, Hui. Do it. Do it. There's no way out.
Oh, wait.
I can absolutely see how people get stupidly fed on him, and then the next game goes 0-10.